The Blood Groom by Damien Tavis Turman. Read by the author. The Blood Groom, Chapter 11. It is a paradox beyond resolution to claim that a person may be suffused with emptiness, for anyone would tell you that to fill something with nothing, one must divest it of its fullness. Beverly was left empty. There with the blasting rain against her window, there in her room with two beds. But there was in her emptiness an indescribable totality, a sort of oxymoronic wholeness which brought her to feeling as if all that was once within her had been dragged violently away and replaced with a tangible and evident void. She felt sick, the way that one does when one's stomach has been left empty too long, when the hollowness groans and contracts upon itself, and the food that one craves is as obnoxious to the senses as the torment of missing it. It was a wayward feeling, an omnipresent dread of everything real, and it clutched her like a damp, sepulchral crowd. In an instant, Beverly had dived arm-deep into the crevice beneath the mattress of her bed, feeling one way and another for the sharp, broken spoon that she had hidden there that morning, that immemorial expanse of hours ago. It was concealed in the tangles of the tucked-in sheet corners. She whimpered in despair until her fingers closed around it, and she could draw it, simple, smooth, magnificent, out from its gloomy suffocation. When she freed it and looked upon it again, a bob of hope jerked the chain of her heavy, anchored heart, inducing it to throb feebly against the impenetrable melancholy in which it was mired. Gratefully she held it, and almost wept. In the suddenness of a half-drawn breath, Beverly was attuned to a pervasive hush, a pure and almost awesome silence that swept over everything like an eradicating angel. The rain had stopped altogether, a kind of cap seeming to have been closed over the sky, so that not even the faintest wind-cast remnant now lighted on the window pane. Sun slinked into the room again. The stealthy return of a faithless paramour, heavy, honey-like, autumnal, the certain signature of the resumption of day. Late afternoon, always the best time, though now the wrong time, for dinner was still to come, and solitude was never assured till then. Lustfully, Beverly stroked the jagged prongs of the defiled utensil against her cheek, her throat, and briefly, cautiously, her arm, leaving no marks, but reminding herself of the marks that her patience would secure. She returned the plastic shard to its original place, a half-arm's length beneath the mattress and clear of encumbering linens. Then she sat, legs curled, at the bedside, with her head sunk in her arms. The girl's loneliness was terrible, but when placed within the dim panorama of her whole life, it was, to her perception, inevitable. Doubtless the fault was all hers. She had been given a roommate, a darling little enigma who, for all her worrisome predilections, had at least provided ready company in this ward full of hostile and dislikable strangers. But the girl, when taken from the academy, could not simply mold her manners in accordance to fate's demand. She could not come from a place where she had lost all hope of friendship already, and enter a place where new sympathizers were yet to be won, and thus were not yet lost, without dragging her old disposition like a mouldering corpse behind her. No, she had to arrive with the presumption that friendship, or even genial companionship, was forbidden her by virtue of her being herself, and that her end, being incontestable, may as well be hurried straight along. She had to act as if her only wish were to be alone, even though loneliness, especially in this new place, was the thing that afflicted her most. Through the mist of those few tears that she had failed to retain, Beverly stared ahead at the digital clock and saw the time was a few minutes past 4 in the afternoon. In the shock and tumult of her roommate's inexplicable advance and subsequent removal, Beverly could not forbear from wanting the reassuring sound of her father's voice in her ear, even if it could express nothing but impatience and uncomprehending disdain, for he was undoubtedly still angry with her, though 24 hours now stretched between her and the spectacle at St. Teresa's. She had considered calling him on the telephone presently, but had wanted to be fully recomposed first, in order not to embarrass him with some confounding emotional display, while he was most likely in the presence of some client or another. After a few minutes of modest cathartic self-indulgence, Beverly was put sufficiently in order to realize the foolishness of trying to reach her father at all. She didn't know at which office he was, and if she dialed him on his mobile phone, he would either refrain from answering altogether or enter in a state of agitation for having been interrupted in the midst of some business. Rather than being comforted, she would merely find further reassurance that his purpose for having her kept at the hospital was not to ensure that she recovered from her wounds, which were hardly dangerous, but to put her out of his mind while her future at St. Teresa's was being considered. The knowledge that she was alive, accounted for, and incapable of causing him further consternation, was surely enough for him. She might have looked for relief in the entertainment room, where perhaps a number of the long-sleeved girls would be found amidst the assembled gallery of inmates, with their invisible encyclopedia of disorders and infirmities, their remote stares pointed at the pulsating face of the television. But Beverly was never mistaken about the source of her isolation, which was always the same, irrelative of the numbers around her. For at St. Teresa of Avila's, no less than here, she was scarcely wanting for company. It was only that she had never found any company that suited her, and even after the passing of a year at her school, she never failed to feel and to be regarded as a stranger dropped conspicuously amidst a congregation of friends. If only once she could have entered a room without imagining or ascertaining that she had interloped upon some exclusively and formerly congenial cabal, to the atmosphere of which her presence constituted some unaccountable kind of poison. At last, without the barest thread of a theory concerning the source of her alienation, Beverly had reverted upon the dubious graces of pride, resolving to shun others, rather than suffering the unavoidable disgrace of being shunned by them. Beverly's only true friend was one whom she had never seen, the Adrian, or was it Adriana, whose letters found her in the dolor of her confinement, whose sympathies to her condition seemed infinite, and whose pen rose adroitly to the obscurest topics, seeming to belong more to an Emerson or an Addison than to a young man of modern extraction. His letters were like the discourses of a philosopher, cultured, eloquent, and improbably profound. The difference in years between her and Adrian only made him a better confidant, for he was always reassuring Beverly that the travails particular to youth would, by the regular provisions of advancing time, be more and more forgotten, and replaced, for well or for ill, by those travails particular to adulthood. Of such adult travails, Adrian provided few precise examples, for he never spoke of his own life in any but the most oblique of terms. He seemed very often to be more ghost than man, a spirit writer inhabiting a hemisphere of pure thought, perhaps communicating with Beverly through the agency of some willing or unwilling medium, some somnambulist with a serviceable hand. It was 2 summers ago that Beverly and Adrian first came to correspond. Having been released from school for the season, Beverly had been taken to her father to spend several weeks on purported holiday at the house he owned in the Adirondack Mountains, many miles north of St. Teresa of Avila's, and farther still from the pristine downstate suburb of new model mansions into which she had been born. She had been promised perpetual afternoons drifting upon the lake, and late warm nights counting stars by a stone-encircled fire, and listening to her father strum guitar chords he had learned long ago in his Yale dormitory room, and had even employed for 2 semesters in some jocularly named rock band. It is perhaps too evident already to warrant recounting that as ever before and after, Beverly instead spent the best portion of her vacation left to herself, waiting for Mr. Kiernan to conclude an eternal succession of telephone conferences or answer an ever-diminishing pile of emails, with the fact of his being on vacation evident in nothing but his sockless loafers and flannel collars. His paternal dereliction was further excused by the rain, the ceaseless, merciless, unappeasable deluge that hung for weeks over the mountainside, causing the planks of the dock to vanish under the dark water of the lake, and making the loons and the warbling doves howl and moan for pity through the early hours of morning. Cloistered behind the gates of her school or behind the covers of her books, Beverly had taken little notice of the computer that her father had given her on her 12th birthday, and it was only by his compulsion that she brought it to the summer house. He had feared that a month or more entirely removed from society would perhaps agree with her too much, and he assured her that if she could find no one with whom to associate among her classmates, she could surely find some group, some community on the web by whom her solitary and introspective nature was shared, and were themselves the standards of fraternity. "But I wouldn't want to meet anybody else like me," she had told him. "I don't like myself as it is." Nevertheless, the computer came alongside Beverly's wheeling suitcase full of books, which was twice the size of that which held her clothing. Instead, as the weeks crept one into another, Beverly discovered that the refuge her books had so often brought her when retreating from others was in this prison constructed of oaken panels, and the indefatigable rain beyond them of less and less worth in bringing her refuge from her own melancholy. Her first impulse was to try writing her own poetry, her back against the bedboard and notebook on her knees, but this merely provided her a path further into her own thoughts, which as usual were disturbed by an even wilder squall than that which raged outside. Self-expression, she thought as she flung the notebook over and watched it land in a disarray of bent pages, is for people whose selves are worth expressing. Then, glancing over at a copy of Walden that she had earlier been perusing, she picked the notebook up again, considering that perhaps, since she was likewise in a cabin of immoderate size, beside a pond, a sprawling lake, she might begin a journal of her own. Again, she was halted by the storming of her own mind, which had nothing fond to expound about the world, and could propose no philosophy by which it might be made brighter, fairer, or drier. It was only then that she began to look with some hopefulness at the computer, which had been left in its carrying case on the seat of a Quaker-style chair in the corner of her large and largely vacant room. Though Beverly felt only the most impoverished of attachments to her own generation, its habits and diversions were too pervasive to elude her. Once she had reacquainted herself with the garish labyrinth of the web, she had no difficulty in seeking out and discovering a place particularly established for youths aspiring to be called writers, where she dallied for some time, bemused but hardly startled at the simplicity and mediocrity of her peers. Her eyes steered through a charmless landscape of vanity, idolatry, and stark banality, where girls like her had no experience beyond their televisions, whose picture of reality was an intangible projection upon which they tried to superimpose themselves like imbeciles in a cinema reaching for the screen. Their dreams were the imitation of dreams, their words the imitation of words, their thoughts and sentiments a half-witted mimicry of thoughts and sentiments, toxic in their sterility. While a latent murmur of arrogance suggested that she publish some lines of her own, doubt and disdain spoke louder, and she concluded that even proper verse lost in squalid company could only add absurdity to the destitution impounding it. After some hours she regretted that she had ventured so far, and that she had abused her senses in the pursuit of an outer world in which she had no place and no chance of discovering one. Here, at the summit of her disgust, when she was reaching to close the computer's cover and return to her bed, Beverly found herself looking at a page credited to a person calling himself Byron Bish. She had been drawn in by the name, invoking two of her favorite romantic poets, and shoveling with weary, half-shut eyes through the assembled collection of prose fragments and poetic attempts. She grew gradually into the conviction that the author was a person of uncommon literary experience and some originality. She saw that this Byron Bish's page had been but little visited by others, or at least that few persons had recorded their visit with comments. Sensible, she thought, since she could not see how the author of one of the other pages she had attended to could find much that was sympathetic or intelligible to them there. Beverly, however, was fascinated, for here she saw herself hazily in a mirror erected by the words of another, whose fires were lit in a pantheon of old poets and philosophers. and who seemed to reflect that conundrum with which her consciousness was most urgently involved. That is, what does one flee to when one is an intruder in society and a foe unto oneself? This Byron Bish wrote of fleeing into wine, and fleeing into love, and fleeing into books, fleeing even into religion, and arriving nowhere but face to face with his own appalling effigy. He wrote, she thought, something like Baudelaire might have if Baudelaire were to have deprived himself of the benefit of excuses. On the portion of his page set apart for such formalities, Byron Bish listed his proper name as Adrian. His age is 23 and his location as New York, in the town from which she came, the lattermost fact eliciting a tiny, irrepressible pulse of hope in her that one so near to her in thought was also serendipitously near to her in physic. She must write him an email, she thought. Then her head whirled with what such a communication might contain that could be interesting to a man like he, so erudite, so far beyond her in years. There was something like an avalanche of little stones in her breast, and her fingertips became slick with sweat, and in a moment she had slammed the computer shut and retreated to her bed. There she remained, trying without success to read one book and then another, taking up her notebook and discarding it after long minutes, staring at the shadow of her pen upon the unmarked page. At 7 o'clock she went downstairs to see if her father had made dinner, and finding him still on the telephone, took some cans and boxes from the cabinets and began cooking something herself. 9 o'clock came, and Beverly was on her bed again, in her oversized flannels, her hair loosed from its ponytail, with a small straight kitchen knife pressed into her arm. She was in the perfect mood for cutting. There was so terribly much to hate. She had spent the whole day in her bedroom, and had never even tried to coax her father away from his business for a game of chess or an old movie on videotape, and for this she gave herself a cut. During the course of the afternoon, she had devoted herself to the object of writing even one poem or filling even one single page in her diary, but she had written not a line, and for this she gave herself a cut. She had gotten scores of pages further into 3 different books, but had bored at least last of each and finished none. For this, a cut. She had gone on the internet, and she had hated the internet because it was full of fakers and frauds, and she was a faker and fraud like all the rest, and so another cut. She had remained on the internet for long enough to discover a man who seemed to be neither a faker nor a fraud, and so her theory regarding the internet was hobbled, and so a cut. She had betrayed her own theory regarding the internet and had misperceived somebody she found there as something other than a faker and a fraud, which he doubtless was because she had read pages and pages of his writing and yet knew nothing about him except his supposed name and his supposed age and his supposed town of residence. For her credulity, she gladly accepted a cut. She had virtually fallen in love with the words written by this Adrian, this Byron Bish. Cut, 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 cut. She had to write to him, had to prove his reality by demanding a response, but she couldn't. She had nothing to say. She could make no demands of anyone. All she could do was cut, 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 until she had run out of room on her arm, and was in too much agony to lift the knife to the arm opposite. Trembling, she groped for a roll of paper towels she had laid near at hand, but could scarcely find the strength to tear them, and she cried with pain and shame and self-disgust. She pressed one white sheet after another against her arm, watched it drink the blood up, and dropped it drenched and dripping into her waste-paper basket with the butterflies painted on its side. Beverly sat for some time, watching each sheet. She lay against her arm, blushed and grew sated until the worst of the bleeding had passed. With a few long strips of tape and some considerable difficulty, she made a temporary bandage out of several more sheets placed atop each other, wrapped around and haphazardly fastened, which sufficed to contain what effluence persisted. At last, feeling satisfied and in a clear state of mind for the first time all day, she returned to the computer and began writing her letter of self-introduction to Byron Bish, or Adrian. Impassioned though she was by the thought of Securing the young man's acquaintance, she surprised herself with the frankness of her introduction. She wrote, "Dear Adrian, I find your writing to be far more authentic and atypical than anything I expected to discover on such a forum as you have chosen. Having read all of what you have posted, I must confess to being sufficiently affected that I am compelled to seek out more, even if the means must be by your direct and personal response to the present correspondence. Having said as much, I will understand if you consider it imprudent to reply, as I might as well tell you that I am many years younger than you, young enough to make a difference to some people. And furthermore, I am profoundly a troubled soul, whose incurable unease with human society makes her a taxing companion, even in letters. Properly or improperly, I have judged from your various entries that you are someone who is on familiar terms with tragedies, both personal and general, and who may not altogether disdain to suffer some contact with the tragedy that I am. It is selfish and disgusting, but I want you to know me, if only because from your words I think that perhaps you know me already, and that it would be unfair for me not to know you. But you must excuse me, for there are drops of blood falling on the keyboard to which I must attend. Sincerely yours, Beverly." Using the email service provided by the website on which Byron Bish kept his writings, Beverly sent the message immediately, before she had given herself the opportunity to reconsider it. If nothing comes of it, then nothing's lost, she thought, closing the computer again and going to wrap more paper towels over her arm. When Beverly's father visited her some 2 hours later, she lay in the guise of one asleep, her eyes closed, her mouth a little open, her untouched right arm above the covers, resting atop a volume of Wordsworth. She felt her father's weight bear down on the edge of his bed and felt him softly remove the book from her languid hand. She heard him flip through the pages, quickly at first, then slowing, perhaps to meditate upon a poem or two, as if it were the photograph of someone nearly forgotten. "Once upon a time," she heard him whisper. His voice collapsed on the final syllable, and he set the book down on the bed again and got up, going quickly to the door and tapping the light switch off before descending the stairs again. Beverly kept her eyes shut, listening to the rain, the chirping tree frogs, the scolding murmur of the leaves. In St. Teresa of Avila's, it would have been her roommate's breathing that would coax her to sleep, a life going on without reason, making its lonely music for anyone disturbed enough to listen. Outside her hospital room, the rain had halted, and it was only her own breathing that Beverly could hear, along with the ubiquitous subliminal tide of machines and phosphorescent lights and alien voices that she didn't seem able to ignore. She gathered herself up from the side of the bed and went to inquire at the nurse's desk what one could do about sending a letter. End of chapter 11. The Blood Groom by Damien Tavis Toman. Read by the author. The Blood Groom, Chapter 12. It looked to Dr. Wolfe as if two separate medical reports had been grafted into one. She stood a few paces from the new arrival's door, her inscrutable features confessing none of the dubiousness she felt. After the ordeal he had suffered, the patient beyond the threshold oughtn't to have a glimmer of life left in him. But the doctor understood that one must always be prepared for anomalies, miracles of physical resiliency, abetted by medical craft. All the same, he ought to have been in the burn unit, since it seemed likely that his experience would have left him with more external scorching than he endured, while his organs ought to have been cooked like a pot of pearl onions. This she had judged from the description of the state in which the man was discovered, and the state in which he arrived and was somehow resuscitated. Now she held a report which said that after spending 3 days in a coma, the patient was conscious, fully stable, and demanding that he be released, although he couldn't yet walk. Dr. Wolfe pulled a long stream of air up from her stomach, held it for 2 seconds, let it go slowly, and started for the door. She found the young man sitting up, intently picking at the heavy cream-colored bandage encircling his left forearm. He looked alert enough, but if he raised his eyes at Dr. Wolf's entrance, the doctor made no account of it. There was an all but unnoticeable straightening all through his arms and neck, as would go through the body of a grazing deer at the sound of a snapping twig, and before Dr. Wolf could announce herself, the patient said, "I presume you've come to authorize my transfer?" "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Mr. Shepherd," the doctor replied, still flipping back and forth between the reports pinned to her clipboard. "First of all, you are Sylvan Shepherd, are you not?" "Of course," said the young man. "How old are you, Mr. Shepherd?" asked the doctor. 24, said Sylvan. Then abruptly, "No, 25. "How old did you say?" said the doctor. 25, said Sylvan. "I just had my birthday." Dr. Wolf lifted the metal clip atop her board and squinted at the words beneath it, which were printed in minuscule black type. "Ah, yes," she said, "so you did. The night you were brought in here, in fact. You chose an odd method of celebrating, Mr. Shepherd. Wouldn't you have rather been out at the club with some friends?" Sylvan shrugged and continued to pick mutely at his bandage. "You do remember what you did on the night of your birthday, don't you?" asked the doctor. "Vaguely," said Sylvan. "I seem to recall that I had a few drinks and decided to take a long bath." "Ha!" said Dr. Wolf. "And do you normally take your baths with the 40-watt desk lamps?" "Yes," said Sylvan. "They're better than candles for reading by." "Naturally," the doctor coughed. "And what do you suppose happened to your wrists while you were in there, taking your leisure with a book and an electric light?" Again Sylvan passed the question over with silence. "Mr. Shepherd," said Dr. Wolf, advancing to the side of the bed, "it's very obvious that you meant to kill yourself, and I, for one, am stupefied that you didn't succeed." "That's not exactly my fault now, is it?" Sylvan said hotly. "God knows I did my part." "In all events," said Dr. Wolf, "whatever your physical condition is, and it's still under observation, the fact that you have attempted suicide makes you the concern of our psychiatric department, which, incidentally, is why I was sent to speak with you. You're a danger to yourself, Mr. Shepherd. I'm having you committed." You can't be serious," said Sylvan. "Let me see my patient's bills of rights." "Mr. Shepherd," said Dr. Wolf, "I am legally obligated to keep you under the hospital's care until I am absolutely convinced that you are physically healthy and in a reasonable state of mind. I've hardly ever seen anybody so determined to kill himself as you were 3 nights ago, who didn't actually make good. And if you could just walk out of here on your own, which you clearly can't, it seems extremely likely to me that you'd immediately try to snuff yourself again. You don't exactly seem elated to have been given a second chance." For the first time, Sylvan looked up at the doctor, his blue eyes cowled by a gloaming brow. His glare was almost murderous. Then he hung his head again, returning his attentions to the bandages, which he lifted and smoothed down over and over. "As you wish, doctor," he said. "I haven't the slightest regard for what happens to me anymore." End of chapter 12. The Blood Groom by Damian Davis Toman. Read by the author. The Blood Groom, Chapter 13. As the hour approached for Beverly's private session with Dr. Martin, Beverly found herself nearly immobile with anxiety. She was sure that she could find no words to convince the doctor of the extremities of ennui she had endured since entering the ward. She was too distracted by the tempest within herself to read more than a few pages into the copies of the Iliad and Wuthering Heights that she had finally discovered in the activity room, after hunting through hundreds of bright-covered paperbacks with raised lettering for their authors' names and titles such as Sunset Surrender and Pretty and Popular in 14 Days. In her unutterable agitation, she had even ventured from her room on a number of occasions and gone into one or another of the public areas to extract some conversation from whichever of the long-sleeved girls might have been moping about, but none of them would speak to her, nor did she observe any of them speaking to each other. Divided from Jennifer, who had been sealed away in some well-defended section of the ward, their movements began to suggest an unspoken, perhaps unspeakable conspiracy. They began to look less and less like the lovers of poetry they claimed to be, and more like the desert tribes people contemplating the advancement of an immemorial blood feud. Moreover, the dissimilarity between the long-sleeved girls and the other denizens of the ward grew, to Beverly's estimation, continually starker. The muttering, slipper-shod old men and women whose rambling soliloquies littered the air of the hallways and public rooms, the middle-aged victims of nervous collapses who sat quiet and embarrassed in their rooms or lingered interminably at the telephones, these were the floor's natural occupants. Without Jennifer, whose lunacy had at first anointed them all, the long-sleeved girls were out of place and, like Beverly, were bored to oblivion. Having observed this general deflation of esprit among the other girls, Beverly almost wished to be adopted into their company, since it seemed to her that, despite their curious loyalties, and in some part because of them, these were a different sort than the girls whom she had known at school. They were followers, yes, but followers of what, to Beverly at least, was an original and unexplored creed, which caused Beverly's studious temperament to seethe with curiosity. The group's naked rejection of her, the way they moved to other quarters whenever she came near and stumbled into the impenetrable conclave during all ward lectures, was not only a sting to Beverly's heart, but a torment to her mind, which she could not suffer a mystery without shrewdly pursuing its solution. All Beverly could hope for from Dr. Martin was that he would let her go, that he would pronounce her utterly well and entirely sensible and release her to whatever arrangements her father had procured for her. She ruminated unceasingly upon what sort of excuse she might provide for the extravagance of her exhibition in the bathroom of St. Teresa's, where the custodians were doubtless still scrubbing her bloodstains from between the floor tiles, but without resorting to demoniacal possession, which was not even her black-frocked wardens were likely to believe. She could think of nothing. Her last memory was of reading a letter from Adrian in which she had perceived a more desultory tone than usual. In any case, she felt very sane now, despite her nightly ritual of excavating and quickly returning the sharp stem of the plastic spoon. But every day she spent there in the ward, the danger of losing her sanity seemed rather to grow than to recede. She no longer noticed whether the pills she was allowed and constrained to swallow made her feel any different than she had felt without them. It was difficult for her now to lie down without passing to sleep, and difficult for her to think of very much she wanted to do other than to lie down. It was undeniable that she was depressed, but far more now that she was confined to the psychiatric ward than she had ever been before, even though confinement of one or another kind was practically all she had ever known. She could not imagine that Dr. Martin would find such an argument particularly moving. At 8 o'clock, 2 hours before she and the doctor were to meet, Beverly was half sick with trepidation. The only solution was to take as long a shower as she was allowed and to find some perfectly discreet place on her body on which to test, at long last, whether the plastic spoon shard was actually able to pierce the skin. If it was, she promised herself she could cut her own throat and die before anyone, however quick or crafty, could save her. Why not now? Why not here? She heard her mind repeating over and over, and the irony of the scenario seemed almost too good for a worthless life like hers. And if they were to discover her, if they were to save her, what could they do? They could send her where they sent Jennifer, and she could leave the long-sleeved girls to waste away with envy, there among the commonplace mumblers and neurotics. After going to the nurse's station to collect the towel, Beverly returned to her room, inexpressibly grateful that she'd been assigned no new roommates, and, closing the door quietly, went to seek her humble means of deliverance under the mattress. She had been a little delirious the previous night, having fallen asleep briefly, and reawakened with the stem still in her hand. She somewhat recalled burying it deeper than usual and closer to the head of the bed. As she sought for it, her hand passed over something unfamiliar, and she felt a sudden flash of pain, which caused her to withdraw in wonder. Seeing a streak of blood on her fingertips, she instinctively put it to her mouth and realized that the wound and the peculiar sting accompanying it was unmistakably a paper cut. She lifted the mattress with the back of her smarting hand, and with the other went carefully underneath again, drawing forth a little white booklet made of stiff copying paper and stapled twice along the spine. On its cover it bore a simple rendition in pen and ink of 5 dark tallies etched upon the face of a white heart, matching that which was worn by one of the long-sleeved girls. Above this, in characters formed by what must have been an electric typewriter like the one Beverly's father still kept from his college days, was written, "The Blood Groom," and the subtitle, "An Accursed Liturgy." At once, Beverly opened the pamphlet, the pages of which were irregular and jagged and were almost certainly made up of the folded quarters of a stack of hand-cut paper. They bore the dark smudges and imperfections of a document that had been photocopied from another photocopy, and the numbers at the bottom corners of each page, some of which were only partly discernible, had originally been scribbled in longhand. The book was full of poems, written in free verse without meter or rhyme, in tidy little paragraphs that often took up only one page, but sometimes two. Thumbing through it for the first time, she noted that some of them were only a single sentence long. This must have been Jennifer, Beverly thought, and then she wondered, could this be him? Could this be our poet of whom Alyssa spoke? It must be. What other poet could Jennifer have been reading, even carrying with her, for her rendezvous at the hospital with the rest of the gang? She scoured the cover once again, but could find no trace of an author's name, nor were any of the poems individually ascribed. They didn't have titles even, only Roman numerals surmounting each. I don't believe it, Beverly mused. Could Jennifer have written this herself? I'm sure I'd be able to tell from the writing if she had. Utterly forgetting both her shower and her intended assignation with fate, Beverly fell on the bed and began reading at the first page, her brow pinched with concentration, her fingertips poised on the worn corners of the pamphlet which Jennifer's fingers had bent before. Predisposed by the rudeness of the book's construction to imagine that its contents would to be rude as well, Beverly was instead surprised by its cleverness, its muted sophistication, its actual poetic power. It seemed to her that the author had to have been somebody of far greater maturity and experience than Jennifer, who was, after all, a year younger than Beverly. Its style was easy, elegant, and rather old-fashioned. Though it was so devoid of any parlance or colloquialism, it was quite impossible to say when it might have been written originally. It almost resembled a translation of something penned centuries ago, although Beverly doubted this was the case, since the poems, or prose poems, were almost wholly concerned with the subject of cutting, a late 20th century phenomenon as she understood it. If any such book had been written before the last decade, Beverly, who did not forbear from making her own habit a subject of some study, certainly ought to have heard of it. But here it was, like any other book of hymns or prayers or sober meditations, but rather than exalting God or nature or the Holy Mother, it bore odes to the razor blades, and invocations to sadness, psalms to the sublimity of scarred flesh, and pious exhortations to the hopeless social outcast, the only type of person who could peruse its pages without succumbing to revulsion. Only a few poems into the parsimonious little book, Beverly was as enamored as she was appalled. She could scarcely prevent her heart from leaping through her open mouth onto the homely blotted typeface. In all of her experience, she had never read anything so outrageous and yet so eloquent, so repugnant yet so enchanting. The book addressed her directly and from all sides. It spoke to her self-loathing, but also her vanity. It appealed to her love of both the beautiful and the macabre. It expounded to her reason while singing to her passions. It was so real that it must have been false. The universe was taking its fun at Beverly's expense by calling a book from the ether that was written only for her and planting it in the hands of a lunatic. But as she passed from the book's first part into its second, there were, she noted, 3 parts altogether. She gradually ceased to wonder why this blood groom had been so evidently prized by the demented Jennifer Sutton, and doubtless by her unhinged brood of followers as well. In the first part, the nameless author argued the virtue of cutting, according to unerringly psychological and physical pretexts, speaking only of the euphoria it brought and praising the cutter for her active self-mortification, by which means she prepared herself for initiation into higher realms of perception and experience, and release from the bonds of ephemeral vanities and vices and so on. All of this was quite abstract, but reasonable enough by Beverly's reckoning. In its second part, however, the book began to lift the veil on what it truly was, namely what it had claimed to be on its face, an accursed liturgy for an actual religion, in which cutting was, so far as Beverly could gather from the increasingly cryptic poems, something akin to a sacrament, or at least a daily form of devotion, like the praying of the rosary, she conjectured. It was the second part was surely the most wonderful. but the most difficult for Beverly to penetrate. It was, or it appeared to be, a kind of love letter to the reader, written, Beverly surmised, by the figure called the Blood Groom, who here alone spoke of himself in the first person, and the subject, that is, the cutter, in the second person. These were, for all their extraordinary beauty, woeful impartations. The author spoke as if he was suffering the pains of death, and delivering, in the grandest language yet employed, his final wishes, instructions, blessings, and words of adoration to his disciples, whom he addressed not as children, but as lovers. The third part was an apocalypse of sorts, suggesting not that the world would be brought all at once to a terrible end, but that it would continue, with the passing of time, to be less and less worthy of habitation, that it would become too baneful a place for the sufferance of the elect. The world will not end for the reader's sake, it seemed to say, but when the proper time comes, when the apotheosis of despair is attained, the elect must end it for themselves. Beverly could see, as she closed the fantastical document, the perversity of all it expressed. If she were not already someone who had come to cherish the sight of her own blood, and from time to time the thought of her own release from the tedium and torment of life, she would not have understood the book at all, except to conclude that it was among the most monstrous, profane, and detestable of things ever penned by the hand of man or devil. She had spent enough time dwelling under the guardianship of the Church that she had developed a keen faculty for discerning heresy, even in its subtlest forms. The Blood Groom was not subtle, but neither was it audacious, for it was, she was certain, the work of a Christian hand, and was written so as to hold a particular allure for those to whom the Gospels, dictates, and traditions of that religion were not unfamiliar. It was, Beverly decided, a text devised for girls whose first Christ had abandoned them in the crowded existential thoroughfare of modern life, to lure them into a state of ease by sanctifying their disconsolation, and gently replace their missing God with tragic poetical psychopomp, immortalized by death in the suppleness of youth, the very shade of Orpheus, crooning irresistibly from the pit of Hades. Staring suddenly out of her rumination, Beverly glanced across the room and gasped at discovering that she had been reading and rereading the wicked little book for nearly 2 hours' time, and was scarcely 15 minutes away from her appointment with Dr. Martin. Passing her gaze once more over the heart and chalice emblem on the tattered cover, the meaning of which she still had not been able to deduce from the book's contents, she hurriedly returned it to the spot where she had found it, took up her towel, and rushed to the shower, leaving her jagged implement behind in the Blood Groom's company. As she began to undress, she paused for a moment before the polished metal of the bathroom mirror and, to her great disquiet, noticed that her lips were wearing a saturnine smile. Reclaiming her will, she forced her features down again until her expression was sufficiently somber to resemble something belonging to herself, not some long-banished child, left to die of famine in the overgrowth of years. How disgusting, she thought, turning from the reflection and tearing her shirt angrily off her shoulders. How horrible, how false. End of chapter 13. The Blood Groom by Damian Davis Toman. Read by the author. The Blood Groom, Chapter 14. Beverly had only just taken her hair down from the towel and bound it in a loose ponytail when, announced by a few tentative raps, Dr. Martin himself appeared at her door and asked if she was ready to come with him. As Beverly stepped into her flat-soled shoes, the doctor remarked, "It must have been nice, having this big room all to yourself, eh?" Beverly merely shrugged in response, and they went together into the hallway, where Dr. Martin led her forward with a wave of his clipboard. They came to an unmarked windowless door, which the doctor opened with a swipe of his electronic key, bidding her to enter first. The room was minuscule, lit by a single fluorescent strip, and made almost unnavigable by the presence of few armless chairs and an unadorned metal writing desk. On the wall beside the desk a poster hung askew with one corner torn away. On it a crazy capuchin monkey dangled by one long skinny arm from a leafy vine, glaring at its photographer with its teeth and gums grotesquely bared. "Keep hanging in there," read the caption underneath it. Welcome to the interrogation chamber, the doctor smirked, and he showed Beverly the chair across from the desk. As she took a huddled position in the seat, Beverly found herself utterly distracted by the poster, which, although not at all large, seemed to overthrow the rest of the tiny room altogether, groping at her periphery every time she endeavored to look away. Dr. Martin marked the girl's agitation and said, "Not a fan of monkeys?" "I abhor them," said Beverly, finally sitting almost completely sideways in the chair so that the image was at her back, then turning her eyes to the floor. Dr. Martin slipped behind the desk and into his own chair, his clipboard ringing against the tabletop. He asked her why. "They remind me too much of people," answered Beverly. "Capricious, arbitrary, inconstant, predictable only in terms of the horrible things one knows will do the moment one's attentions are diverted. Like children, like pretty much everybody in this world." "Have you ever actually watched the way monkeys behave firsthand?" asked Dr. Martin. "I mean, are you speaking from personal experience or just relating what you've heard about monkeys from someone else?" "No, I've actually seen monkeys before, once," said Beverly. "It was a long time ago, but it's one of my only memories from childhood that I can recall automatically." "Oh," said the doctor, "and please tell me about it." "Wouldn't you rather talk about something relevant?" Beverly asked, with a twinge of petulance. "I'm sure your time is valuable, unlike mine." The doctor stared at Beverly so that she could feel his eyes surging out from beneath shapeless brown and gray brows, though her own gaze remained cemented to the floor. "We have time," he said. Beverly crossed her arms and began to pick backward through her memories, as one would try to collect beans from amidst the shards of a shattered jar. She deplored her memories, and would have refused the task obstinately if she did not suspect that her release from the ward was conditional upon her cooperation with such invasions. The pleasure she had gotten from baiting her previous therapist, Dennis, with obscurities and agonizing silences worked against her here, and so she began. "Back when my mother was still with us, I was about 7 years old. My parents took me for a big trip to the Bronx Zoo. We only lived a brief train from the zoo, and I used to beg incessantly to go there, but my father was always working, day and night it seemed, and not leaving the apartment for anything. He didn't even stand to look outside most days. So when my father finally took a day off and somehow convinced my mother that nobody would jump out of any alleys and stab us all to death, and he told me that we were going to spend the whole day at the zoo, it seemed like the greatest thing to me. The whole time, all I could talk about was how I wanted to see the monkeys. I guess every kid has some particular animal that he or she gets hung up about, like dinosaurs or horses or whatever, and for God knows what reason, my fixation was on monkeys. I had a stuffed monkey named Chimpo that was with me when I slept, when I ate, on the side of the tub when I took a bath, all the time. All of my favorite books were about monkeys. I would drive fits sometimes, jumping all over the furniture, making intolerable monkey noises, picking random knickknacks up and pretending I was going to throw them. All I would eat for breakfast was a banana. Sometimes my mother would lock herself in the bedroom for hours and hours, vowing not to come out until her daughter was changed back into a nice little human being again. I suppose that only got me more worked up. My father would come home past night and find me sleeping in front of the television with my head resting on Chimpo and banana peels scattered all around me because I couldn't think of anything else to have for dinner. He would carry me to my bed, and I'd hear him go in and start howling at my mother for how she'd neglected me and let me fend for myself all day. And she'd scream and sob in reply, saying, "I told her to stop. I told her to be human again. I won't be responsible for an ape," and so on. Somehow it just never occurred to me I was actually tormenting her. I just liked the feeling of my father scooping me up and laying me in my bed. I liked to hear them screaming about me, arguing over me, making me the center of it all. Anyway, after spending that entire summer so far trapped in the apartment with my mother, since she was too mortified of the outside world to ever take me on excursions anywhere without my father, we at least were heading for the zoo. I was trying my hardest to behave because I knew my father had enough on his hands trying to keep my mother frenzy of nerves, and I dreaded anything going wrong and forcing us to come back home. My mother, as I remember her, looked like a department store mannequin that had been miraculously animated and had time to confront the world outside her window display. She wore enormous sunglasses that were like blinkers against reality, and her movements were all stiff and sudden and bird-like. She was so perpetually in terror of everything. She and my father argued for a long time over the mode by which we would travel, taxi or train. On one hand, the train would be teeming with strangers, staring at me, possibly touching our things, or even touching us, all trapped there together underground like a coffin on wheels. But the taxi, my mother knew how cabmen drove, treating the street as their own private roller rink, scattering pedestrians at crosswalks, shouting and honking and cursing, altogether forming an endless corridor of deafening noise and moving metal, all mixed in with ambulance sirens and huge bellowing trucks, a never-ending nightmare from our doorstep in Manhattan, all the way to the Bronx, down all those ugly streets, past all those filthy people who infested the doorways of pawn shops and wretched delicatessens, watching us pass with their lightless eyes, ravenous with envy, wishing they could drag us out and strip us bare and feed us to the feral cats and the cockroaches. But at last it was settled that we would go by car, since it was better for my mother to suffer the sight of humanity from behind a barricade of glass and steel, however flimsy. The driver was ordered to proceed gently, and we were followed by a parade of blaring horns. Having every reason to expect and dread that my mother would go limp with repugnance at the sight of the animals, my father and I were instead awestruck to find that, after a short while of hobbling about in her customarily dazed and consternated fashion, she began to take a singularly sympathetic interest in many of the creatures we visited, as we made our ambling circuit around the numberless pits and cages and brick pavilions. She even consented, with only a moment's reluctance, to accompany us into the nocturnal exhibit, where, pressing close to my father's side, she slipped the tinted glasses from her eyes and peered breathlessly with us into a world made by men who had exerted their dominion by saying, "Let there be darkness." She almost seemed uncommonly at ease there among the bats and the scurrying rodents, where everyone passed in delicate silence, as if they were in a theater after the lights had gone down and the curtain had been drawn. She was rigid and anxious again on returning to the sunlight. Perhaps it's superfluous to mention that the only time my mother nearly became unraveled was at the monkey cages, murmured Dr. Martin absently, his chin in his hand. Indeed, continued Beverly, at the monkey cages. While I danced from one cage to the next, trying with all my heart to take hold of the ecstasy that the moment had promised, I stood immovably in the center of the walkway, refusing to advance. In my excitement, I tried once to reach toward a cage in which a laughing squirrel monkey was scuttling across the chinks, curiously surveying me and all the other children with its ink-black eyes, but my mother shrieked and my father leaped in my grasping. "Are you trying to give her a heart attack?" The monkey observed this and gibbered heatedly in response, climbing back and forth between the right and the left. From the branches round about, its brood members all added their voices to the din, and my mother recoiled in fear, backing unconsciously into the barrier encircling the opposite cage. Behind her then was some other ape, a small, shaggy, orange monster, flung itself upon the bars with an ear-splitting utterance, so that my mother started forward again with another cry, so paralyzed with fright that her balance abandoned her, and she fell to the ground in the midst of the crowd, weeping, "Get me away from them! Get me away!" Here, though, the monkey seemed to be in collusion with those who had come to gawk at them, for while they pulled on their cages and raised a diabolical chorus of whoops and screeches, all the children who, like me, had left their primates, turned upon this new superior spectacle and joined their own laughter to the jungle creature's scandalous cacophony. Me behind to my embarrassment, and ran to where my mother lay, picking her up tenderly by the arm and leading her away towards the main gates.
In my childish perplexity, I thought for an instant that they had resolved to let me stay there, perhaps to find a new family among the brutes that I loved to emulate. But when they had gone some 10 or 15 paces off, my father turned and ordered, "Beverly, come!" and I sprinted gratefully to catch them. That was the last time my mother ever tried going out and mixing with the public again, at least as long as I was to know her, which was only about 6 months more. "Do you mind," said the doctor, his voice level and quiet, "do you mind if I ask what happened to her?" "Well, it hardly needs saying that my mother was something of a mess to begin with," said Beverly, her brown eyes still scarcely rising from the floor. She had been since the time I was born, and maybe before that, I don't know. But it was only now, for God knows what reason, that her condition began to blossom into a full-blown psychosis. She was put into every manner of medication to keep her calm, and she started spending almost all of her time hiding in her bedroom, though I had determined to put away my zoological fantasies and become the best-behaved girl a mother could want. Nevertheless, she would have nothing more to do with me. A nurse was hired to look after me and my mother at the same time until school resumed, a young woman just out of college with an accent from Russia or Eastern Europe. My father quite naturally grew more and more desperate, coming home and putting me to bed in the usual way. He would be ejected from the bedroom with a battery of screams from my mother to spend the night on the couch. She had grown untouchable, out of reach. My father certainly knew that there was no way to keep from putting her into an institution, and I would hear him sometimes talking to the nurse about it. One night he and the nurse stayed up very late together, and when I got up before sunrise to use the bathroom, I saw that they were both on the couch still, their arms around each other, sleeping soundly. A week or two after that, I woke up in the middle of the night to find my mother standing over me with her hands poised around my throat. I managed to scream once before she started to squeeze. My father came in, accompanied by the nurse, and together they wrestled my mother away while she roared maniac. I was too traumatized to remember the rest of that night very well, except in the form of a mostly forgotten nightmare. The last image I have of my mother is with some men hunched over her, pinning her down while jabbing her with a syringe, and the nurse smothering me to her bony breast, trying to keep me from watching or hearing. When my mother was subdued, she was carried out into the hall. I heard the elevator doors open and close, and that was the last I ever knew of her. The nurse kept coming back for the next few months, but just to see my father, although she started bringing me little toys and things, which I put into the garbage when she wasn't looking. She would stay for a long time after I was sent to bed. Gradually her visits got further apart, and after a while more. If my father ever tried to have any more girlfriends after her, he never told me about it. Not that I'd want to know. "So that's like monkeys," said Dr. Martin. "Can you blame me?" Beverly asked. Dr. Martin shook his head, his fingertips working an imaginary curl into the end of his tidy mustache. End of chapter 14. The Blood Groom by Damien Tavis Toman, read by the author. The Blood Groom, Chapter 15. The doctor allowed Beverly to return to her room unaccompanied, a gesture that, however symbolic, comforted her with a feeling of normalcy. She had grown utterly weary of the nurses, whose high-toned, melodious voices seemed aimed at a ward full of children or mental invalids. The genial and serious visits she had just concluded with Dr. Martin left Beverly musing to herself that she would be only too glad to admit that she was a complicated, somewhat dysfunctional creature in need of society's forbearance and understanding, if only it could be offered free of condescension, fearfulness, and mistrust. She had often considered to herself that since nobody around her seemed interested or attuned enough to take note of the small ways in which she evinced her sense of longing, desolation, and self-hatred, she would be forced to do something of such monstrous magnitude as to be unignorable, something that would make everyone regret their inattention. As it was, the only one to regret what she had done so far was herself. Beverly pushed her door open briskly, in the way that one does who is about some business, who is pursuing an intention. In Beverly's case, it was the continued exploration of the blood groom, from the contemplation of which, even through her pitiable interview with Dr. Martin, she had not been able to desist. Several took one step into her room and immediately withdrew with a short gasp, perceiving a human form reposed upon the far bed, which started up in surprise at her entry. Beverly checked the number posted at the door's side and was assured that she had not made a miscalculation. Knotting her brow, she entered again, peering across the room at the figure, who remained obscured by silhouette against the window's late morning glare. She called out a hello in a questioning tone. Her voice, tightening, said, "Jennifer, did they let you come back?" "No, Jennifer's still in the lockdown somewhere," said Alyssa, her pouting features and straight, streaked hair coming into view as Beverly approached. "Didn't anybody tell you that I'd be your new roommate? I just found out myself about an hour ago." "No, I wasn't told, naturally, but I've been with the doctor for a while," said Beverly, inadvertently allowing her eyes to slip down the mattress on which Alyssa sat, beneath which both the book and the plastic spoon shard were stowed. "Still, it would be nice if they gave us some warning about such new arrangements. What was their reason for moving you?" "The usual," said Alyssa, "a new addition to the ward. Since there are so many more females than males up here, they tend to give the boys the single rooms and move the girls together into the doubles, especially the young ones like us. They must figure we're used to having our privacy compromised." "Oh, hell," said Beverly. "We're not going to have another smelly, licentious old man to deal with, are we?" Alyssa shrugged her shoulders and resumed chewing the piece of gum that she had tucked away somewhere in the corner of her cheek. "I don't know," she said, "but whoever he is, he's supposed to be admitted this morning. I guess we'll find out at the lunchtime." Beverly lamented silently that her new roommate was too inconsiderate to ask which bed she ought to use, and chided herself for being too shy to speak up about it. Recalling that her own clothes had been laid across the opposite bed, however, Beverly decided that Alyssa had chosen rightly, given the evidence. If only there had been some warning, she thought, she would have found different hiding places for her two humble treasures. She sighed very quietly and went to the other bed, picking up the manhandled edition of the Iliad that she had tossed face down thereupon. Taking her seat on the bed's edge, she saw that Alyssa had involved herself with a book of her own, which she was reading while reclined upon her side, with her back turned toward Beverly. Beverly stood up and leaned forward on her toes, curious to find out what manner of literature would interest one so seemingly boorish and vapid as Alyssa. The girl must have sensed Beverly's eyes upon her, though, because she set the book down at her side, hiding it completely, and turned around to regard Beverly with a look of stern inquiry. "Sorry," Beverly said abashedly. "It's the bookish girl's curse. I always want to know what everybody else is reading." Alyssa paused for a moment, with her lips half parted, as if debating with herself whether or not to show Beverly the volume in her hand. Finally she said, "It's kind of a weird book. At least it will be to you." "What?" said Beverly. "Is it about cutting? There's no shame in that. We both do it. I've read a book or two about it myself." Alyssa took her eyes from Beverly's and pulled her legs up a little toward herself. "Yeah, it's about cutting, I guess," she said, "but not in a self-help kind of way. Like I said, it's weird." "Come on, show me what it is," said Beverly. "I promise I won't pass any judgments." She pressed two fingers together and held them in the air, signifying her vow. "I'm really not supposed to show this to anyone," said Alyssa, "but if you absolutely swear that word of it never leaves this room, I can't see the harm. I just don't laugh at the way it looks, because it's not even like a regular book. It's just sort of pages stapled together." Furtively, she held the book up so that its cover faced Beverly. "The Blood Groom!" Beverly cried. "Where did you find that?" What do you mean, find it? Said Alyssa. This copy is mine. I got it from Jennifer, like everyone else. How the hell do you know about the blood groom? Get off the bed and I'll show you, said Beverly. Alyssa obeyed, and with a moment's groping, Beverly recovered the niggardly tome she had discovered earlier that morning. She and Alyssa sat side by side at the bed's edge and compared the two identical-looking pamphlets. Did Jennifer give this to you? Alyssa asked. Well, yes, kind of, said Beverly. Actually, don't tell anyone, but she left it here under the mattress. I found it by accident this morning. I mean, I'll give it back to her, of course, if I ever see her again. Am I to understand that everyone in your gang, or whatever it is, has one of these? Yes, each of us has one, said Alyssa. We all got them from Jennifer. Nobody except us is supposed to read the blood groom. If Jennifer found out you had her copy, she would probably have to kill you. Kill me, Beverly chuckled. Come on, Alyssa, it can't be that serious. The thing. It's totally serious, said Alyssa. Her expression was firm as etched marble. And so am I. The blood groom is not something to be casually messed around with. Nobody is allowed to read it who hasn't been specifically chosen by the author, or one of his hand-picked lieutenants, like Jennifer. How much of it did you actually read? Well, the whole thing, said Beverly. Several times through, in fact. It's only about 125 pages long, and sparsely printed ones at that. I still haven't made much sense of it, though. Of course not, said Alyssa. You weren't chosen. God knows what would have happened if you had let the book get out, let it fall into impure hands. We could have all ended up locked up in a hospital psych ward, Beverly interposed drolly. No, said Alyssa. We're supposed to be here. I still don't know why, but that's the way Jennifer wanted it. It's part of the plan somehow. I just can't understand why it's turning out this way, with Jennifer dragged off to some other part of the ward while the rest of us waste away with boredom, completely clueless as to what to do next. That's why I've been going over and over my copy all morning, to see if there's anything in here that can serve as a direction, or at least tell me what we're all supposed to be waiting for. But without Jennifer, it's useless. She's the interpreter, the only one of us who's spoken to the author, who knows the hidden meaning of his words. Who is this author? Asked Beverly. Where is he? How do you know that Jennifer didn't write this book herself? Think about it, said Alyssa. You've met Jennifer. She's intelligent in her own way, but she's not nearly smart enough, nor creative enough to put something like this together. The blood groom isn't what it looks like. It's not just leaves of paper folded and stapled together. It's not just poetry for poetry's sake. It's like the Egyptian Book of the Dead or something. Everything in it has two meanings. One of them is the obvious meaning, what it says to cutters like me and the rest of the girls about ourselves and why the world affects us the way it does. Makes us want to hurt ourselves, to escape life through little windows of pain. Beneath that is a sort of mirror image, a shadow world, of which everything we know is only a reflection or a shadow imitation. The author, whoever he is, and this is as much as Jennifer has told us, is from that world, the underworld, where all of us, the cutters, the true believers, actually belong. And the blood groom is a bridge, but only for those who are worthy of crossing, those who have been chosen to cross. For a period, Beverly was rendered breathless by the earnest vehemence of this otherwise average-looking girl's bizarre declamation. The correct thing to do might have been to laugh, or to take the young lady by the shoulders and shake her, as would be done with someone who has lapsed into unconsciousness, or to hold her hand and look solemnly, tearfully into her eyes and say, "Poor child." But Beverly did none of these. Her curiosity about the sect of long-sleeved girls, for a sect was what it now very properly showed itself to be, grew only thirstier, and she only more fascinated. She had always wondered at the credulity and innocence of persons who, having been passed a leaflet in a bus depot or attended some basement prayer meeting, came fully to trust and believe that such and such a man was a new incarnation of the risen Christ, or that such and such a book was a new holy gospel by which all others were made known. Now that the very rabbit's hole, so mysterious and elusive, had opened at her feet, and Alyssa was the rabbit, who she would not chase away by laughing, or scoffing, or scolding. Well, how do you know that I am not one of the chosen, Beverly insisted. How do you know that Jennifer didn't intend for me to have this copy of the book? Perhaps that's what she was trying to do when she leapt atop me before the nurse came in and had her taken away, initiate me somehow, shock me into accepting that which I would otherwise have balked at, as any other supposedly normal person would. Now that I think of it, it was right here at the head of the bed where Jennifer was crouching before they grabbed her and hauled her away. I think she had the book in her hand already and was putting it here for me to find. How else can you explain what she was doing? Alyssa shook her head, clenching her ragged copy of the Blood Groom in both hands before her, as trying to absorb some mystical truth from it by force of concentration. I don't know, she said. It makes a certain amount of sense, but you understand it would be dangerous, fatally dangerous, of me to assume anything for myself. Only Jennifer knows for sure. And yet, pressed Beverly, surprised by her own excitement. And yet, continued Alyssa, the way that she was talking to you before, like back in the recreation room, after all the all-ward lecture, she did seem to be leading you somewhere and trying to make you comprehend something. The girls and I, we didn't understand it. We were just following along, but that's the way it was with each of our recruitments. We each had our own little riddle to solve, our own little leap of faith to take, to prove to Jennifer that we were ready to be given the book, ready to adopt it as truth and to trust it to the end. Everything's been so strange, so out of control, since Jennifer transformed overnight from the shyest girl in school into some sort of charismatic evangelist for the Blood Groom and its author. Me, I was popular once, believe it or not. Everyone wanted to be my friend, though I treated everyone like dirt. Then I started cutting, a little at first, then so much that I couldn't keep it a secret anymore, and the contempt started to return back on me. I was friendless when Jennifer found me. I passed her tests, then she showed me the book, and I understood what was happening to me. I didn't belong into the world anymore. Whether she was trying to show you the same thing, Beverly, I just don't know, but it seems like her style. The fact is, said Beverly, I've already read the book. I know about as much as any of you now, and whatever's about to happen, whatever Jennifer had planned with all of you coming to the psych ward one by one, it concerns me now, too. I've seen some strange things since I got here, Alyssa. I'm in no position to argue what's real and what isn't. Right, said Alyssa. You have read the book, and it's possible, though far from certain, that Jennifer intended for you to read it. Now the question is, do you believe in it? Did it open your eyes and fill you with a sense that, even though you might not have understood it completely, it was truth itself, and everything before it was an illusion? Beverly rose suddenly to her feet, the book with her as she paced across the room once and then again. She stood facing the wall. For a few moments, her eyes closed, her face inclined skyward. Then she turned to Alyssa again and said, I'm Catholic. I believe in the Bible and in the Holy Trinity and the divinity of Christ, all of that. But I'm also a skeptic who has come to read the scriptures of my own religion as well as those of others with a cautious eye, critical of human error, of morbid dogma that corrupts spiritual truth. Jesus said, blessed is he who has not seen yet still believes. And though I've read of Jesus' numerous miracles, as well as those of the saints who followed him, I've never seen any myself. They seem to belong to a world of allegory now. I've seen icy cruelty in the eyes of the holy sisters who tortured me, and ardent lust in the eyes of the priests to whom I've confessed. Despite all this, I've striven to believe, viewing the plummet into utter non-belief as unfathomable, a variable forfeiture of life's last remaining hope, followed by an infinity of unspeakable emptiness. More than anything, though, I've heard myself repeating the words of Pontius Pilate before he sent Jesus to the death he could not himself justify. What is truth? This book, The Blood Groom, it does make some kind of sense to me. Perhaps it makes more sense than any book I've ever read has, and I've read thousands. And in the days and hours before I discovered it, I began to glimpse things here around the psych ward, and usually in the company of Jennifer, that were closer to what might be called miracles than anything I've witnessed before. I don't even fully understand how I came to be in this place, of the night that I did this to myself. gave myself the wounds beneath these bandages, I remember next to nothing. It was as if I was observing myself from a very great distance, acting under somebody else's control. Could it be that the same force that led all of your friends here, the same force that led Jennifer here, led me here as well? The more I ponder, the more convinced I am, and yet, is it truth? Alyssa, I don't know. I simply don't know. Alyssa had drawn herself up into a cross-legged position, and from her expression Beverly couldn't tell whether she was considering what she had just heard, or whether she had grown weary, as girls like her tended to do when Beverly spoke her thoughts, and ceased to listen. She did not expect Alyssa to go very far in acting the proselyte, for that was clearly Jennifer's, and only Jennifer's, place. The others seemed to live lives of silent apprehension. Slowly Alyssa lifted her eyes, which were expertly traced in heavy coal-black lines. She looked directly past Beverly, who had arrived in a listless pose upon the naked desk chair, at the digital clock surmounting the writing table. "We'll be expected for lunch in a minute," Alyssa said. "Not a word of the book to any of the other girls. You have to promise. Not a single word." Beverly showed her agreement with a melancholy nod. Their pact settled, Alyssa fell back onto the bed and consumed herself again in a comparison of her own volume of the Blood Groom against that which Beverly had discovered, laying them side by side, page against page. Beverly sat restlessly at the writing desk, her eyes passing back and forth between Alyssa and the digital clock. The hour struck 12 o'clock, and then 12:01, but neither girl rose, nor seemed inclined to. Sometimes Alyssa glanced up. Their attentions would collide, and they would both fly back in embarrassment to their individual meditations. Beverly, taking a pen and some pad of paper, both imprinted with the name of the hospital, turned around and bent over the desk in an attitude of one about to write. She thought of the letter she had for days considered composing to Adrian. Where would it begin? If her internment in the psych ward were all there was to report, the letter would come naturally. She doubted that Adrian, who knew her mind and heart better than any person living, would be surprised by it. But ought she to tell him the rest? Should he know of the boyish apparitions that seemed to haunt her arrival? Should he know of the cult of the long-sleeved girls, or the terrifying attentions Beverly had been paid by their leader, or of this crude marvel of a book that somehow held them all in thrall? The letter would assume all the qualities of a work of fantasy, but then was not Adrian himself a fantasy, a bodiless figment made of paper and dreams? But who else but he could understand? Still, her pen lay dead upon the small starched page. As the minutes dripped downward from the chiming of noon, they heard from beyond their partially open door the sound of trays being wheeled en masse toward the dining room, and the cotton-shod feet of inmates plodding in the same direction. At 10 minutes past, a nurse pushed in and asked if the girls would be taking their lunch in their own room or with the rest of the ward. In the dining room, both the girls said, but they waited for the nurse to slide away again before stirring themselves. Beverly lay her pen perpendicularly against the side of her writing pad. Alyssa placed one book atop the other and rather solemnly, even officiously, returned them both to the place beneath the mattress where Beverly's, formerly Jennifer's, had been interred. Was there any difference between them? Beverly asked as they went side by side to the door. None at all, said Alyssa. They were exact duplicates, right down to the printing imperfections, the skewed letter here and there, the handwritten numbers at the bottom of each page. It's so strange. Strange, said Beverly. Strange how? I don't know, said Alyssa. You'd just think that since Jennifer is the author's chosen prophet or whatever, her book would contain some special knowledge that the rest of us aren't privileged yet to know. Like how teachers know textbooks are the same as the students, except they have all the answers printed in the back. Beverly nodded pensively. I see what you mean, she said. It must show that if Jennifer does have any special knowledge, that is, that she's not just dreaming things up, it's coming from the author itself, through direct communications. That probably proves that the Blood Groom is of modern origin, though from the way it's written, one would hardly believe it. It's funny you think, Alyssa. I never imagined it was anything but modern. I don't have the illusion that ours is the first generation to cut ourselves, but I'm fairly certain that we're the first to get seriously to come out into the open about it. For the first time I read it, I believed the Bloodgroom to be written for us, not cutters in general, but specifically for us, Jennifer and the rest of the girls in our, she hesitated, in search of a satisfactory term, our family. Beverly looked over beneath a lowered brow, smiling at her choice of words. In some way that she couldn't define, the word family suited her exquisitely, drawn from the hearth of genuine dearness. It delivered itself warmly to the plate of the tongue. She noticed that Alyssa and she had been walking all this while, literally shoulder to shoulder. An hour earlier they had been almost strangers. When in the dining room, Alyssa let Beverly enter before her, but rejoined her side when both had gone through. As before, the long sleeves were dispersed through the room, close to the walls, with empty chairs beside them. They all looked up with one motion at the entrance of the pair. As Beverly collected the trays that were marked with their names, Beverly observed that there was on the rack only one tray remaining unclaimed, the tag on which bore the name of Sylvan. She thought it a lyrical name, reading it aloud under her breath, Sylvan. Alyssa veered off in the direction of an unclaimed seat, and like a familiar spirit, Beverly followed after her. But as she prepared to sit across from her roommate, Beverly halted and whispered, "Should I be sitting apart from you? That seems to be what the other girls always do." "Don't bother," said Alyssa. "That's just what Jennifer told us to do, so that we wouldn't start drawing attention to ourselves. It doesn't apply to you, since you're not actually one of us." But she couldn't shake off the sting of hearing Alyssa say this, and say it as plainly as one might say, "Your shoe is untied." With a sunken heart, she stared at the lid of her unopened tray, while Alyssa busily exercised a legion of cauliflower cuts in the midst of her chicken breast, banishing them to a heap next to her little carton of chocolate milk. She seemed hungry. While Alyssa chiseled into the yielding white meat, Beverly took account of a new presence in the room, someone chair-bound, wheeled in by a tall male nurse. A fat woman's rolling neck and unmastered gray hair was obscuring Beverly's view of the occupant, so she shuffled her chair over inches and leaned over the table, hardly. She had gotten used to how everyone stared without shame at everyone else in the ward. Beverly's breath ceased when her exertions brought her a glimpse of the new arrival, a beautiful, frail young man, leaning upon his elbow as a melancholy prince would while brooding on his throne. It arose in one of Beverly's cortexes, exactly the sort that flares up when one old friend unexpectedly in a strange place. As the nurse took the final tray from the rack and lay it across the young man's lap, the length of the room lay between them, Beverly clearly heard him say, "There's a miracle, man." The young man, he lay his hands loosely over the top of the tray and fixed his eyes directly on Beverly. In words which Beverly could not make out, the nurse asked the new arrival where he would like to be stationed. As impossible as it was for her to believe, Beverly watched as the gaunt, regal figure lifted his arm with perfect deliberateness and pointed straight across the room at her and Alyssa's table. There, the arrival's lips moved, the table in the back. With a jerk, the chair and the lovely man started determinately ahead. "You ladies won't mind a little fresh company, will you?" asked the nurse as he rolled the young man into place, so that with Alyssa to his right and Beverly to his left, the three formed a kind of equilateral human triangle. And shrugged. Beverly smiled and shook her head, intending to say, "No, not at all," but losing the words somewhat over her throat. "This is Sylvan," the nurse announced, and now they're introducing a child playmate. "He just joined us in the ward this morning after transferring from the intensive care. He's quite a work of nature, aren't you, Sylvan?" "I wouldn't insult nature by saying so," murmured Sylvan. The nurse chuckled, put Sylvan's tray before him on the table, and began to work the lid off. Sylvan put his hand over the lid, stopping it in place. "I can manage for myself, thank you. You've been..." A moment passed, and he added, "But I couldn't possibly ask for another moment of your valuable time." A shadow of understanding closed across the nurse's face, and he stepped away with a shallow, theatrical bow. "If there's anything else you need," he crooned. "Bon appetit, miracle man." the nurse's departure, Sylvan's countenance sank into a renewed posture of dreary contemplation. He stared intently forward, studying the pale blue water and desolate vista. Struggling against the instinct to explore every millimeter of his complex, captivating face, Beverly let her eyes fall to Sylvan's arms, which were deeply impounded within layers of gauze far surpassing. Furthermore, his fingers were taped together so that rigid mittens on human hands. The fingertips, which the open ends, looked faintly purplish black, in contrast to his facial complexion, which was a chalky white. Thus encumbered, one of his hands lay motionless upon the top of his tray, and the other dangled stiffly over the arm of his wheelchair. "Are you very sure that you don't need any help with your tray?" Beverly inquired, her voice emerging only slightly above the timbre. Flung out of his reverie by the question, Sylvan turned his regard upon Beverly with an impoverished facsimile of a smile. His eyes had the same effect on her as when a newly plucked icicle thrust into the small of her neck. Once she began to shiver, she couldn't stop by any effort of the will. "The truth is, I'm quite helpless," Sylvan admitted. "I simply couldn't abide the company of that abominably sarcastic orderly anymore." Sylvan spoke with an accent that was simultaneously reminiscent of where? Southern Africa, Western Europe, New England? There was no telling. But to Beverly, who was familiar with tones adapted by children of privilege, it was the sound of effortless sophistication, as natural as any product of several centuries unpolluted Parmesan. "Perhaps I can help you," said Beverly, delicately taking hold of the tray's lid. Sylvan let his arm slide off and fall into his lap as Beverly laid the lid aside, releasing a billow of steam from the platter's long-stifled contents. As she did this, she asked, "Why did that nurse keep calling you Miracle Man?" "It's a name I acquired in the intensive care unit," said Sylvan, waving the mist away with a bandaged hand. "They seem to think that I was brought back inexplicably from the clutches of after undergoing an ordeal that I should never have survived." "What actually happened?" asked Beverly. Sylvan smirked. "Nothing so grandiose as a New Testament resurrection, I'm afraid. You see, life and death are both fairly elastic terms for persons of my constitution. We have the utmost aversion to the admittance of finality." I don't really understand," said Beverly. "That's all right," said Sylvan. The aroma of the chicken breast and steamed cauliflower reached his nose, and he recoiled with an expression of agony. "Oh, mercy," he coughed. "Are they trying to kill me all over again?" "I'll take your chicken if you're not going to eat it," said Alyssa. With the arrival of Sylvan, Beverly had nearly forgotten her new roommate's presence entirely. Alyssa had neither remarked upon the introduction of their new dining companion, nor shown him any but the most partial regard. Stupefied by this fact as Beverly was, she counted herself as grateful for being relieved of the risk of jealousy. "By all means, it's yours," said Sylvan. Alyssa snatched the graying carcass from Sylvan's tray with the swiftness of a bird of prey, her plastic fork taking the place of talons. "Have you no appetite at all?" Beverly asked. She had been staging in her mind a poignant melodrama in which she would feed Sylvan by hand, and he would call her his angel of mercy. But Beverly had never taken the top off her own tray, and though she had felt the knobby fist of hunger close within her when she first arrived for lunch, the idea of doing anything so base as of Sylvan now seemed impossible. She had been, under typical conditions, a great lover of cauliflower. Sylvan laughed a laugh that never left his throat and never touched his lips. "Appetite I have," he said, "but I lack the desperation to move upon it." "If you don't think me too forward for asking," said Beverly, "is that why they made you come up here after leaving intensive? Because you wouldn't eat?" "I hardly think so," Sylvan replied. "They doubtless intended to move me to this point that I was recovered enough to go, although they were, as I have said, quite rightfully surprised by the swiftness of my convalescence. The truth is here by any accident." "Do you mean you meant to be taken to the psych ward?" said Beverly. "I mean," said Sylvan, "that the act which brought me here was far from accidental." Beverly nodded comprehendingly, but could not think of anything to say. "And you," continued Sylvan after a small silence, "are you here because you meant to be here, or are you here because you did not succeed in going someplace better?" "Someplace better," Beverly said. Perhaps hell would have been better if I had made it that far. Sylvan smiled at the quip. I meant a more costly institution, he said. No, Beverly replied. I never wanted to come back here, nor to be sent anywhere else like it. I'm not sure what I intended, whether I intended anything at all. They put me here to get me out of the way. Nobody stays here indefinitely, that much I know. What will become of me later is any person's guess. And where would you be if you were not here? Sylvan asked. Beverly's eyes met Sylvan's directly. She didn't lower them this time, and she didn't blink. I'd be alone, she said. The answer seemed to please Sylvan, though he said nothing in reply. All around them, patients were rising from their seats and gathering up their trays, assembling into a babbling queue that wound in a jagged crescent from the corner to the door. The male nurse who had wheeled Sylvan in passed through the line and appeared at his side. He inspected Sylvan's tray and smiled to see that the entree had been devoured. Ah, he said. You see, you were hungry after. The evidence is irrefutable, said Sylvan. I'm overthrowing my own humanity. The nurse chuckled, laying the tray on Sylvan's lap again and resuming his post behind the chair. The ladies won't object if their guest retires for the afternoon, will they? Beverly made a doleful face and shook her head. Alyssa simply stared with mute disdain at the nurse, and then at Sylvan, then rolled her black-rimmed eyes at Beverly, before grabbing her own tray and walking abruptly away. I look forward to our next meeting, Beverly, said Sylvan, extending his formless trunk of a hand. Me too, said Beverly, taking it with the delicacy of a crushed rose. The nurse gave Beverly a queer wink and whirled his charge's chair around, whistling as he pushed it towards the door. Sitting alone in the desolated dining room, Beverly lifted the top of her tray and picked up a few pieces of limp cauliflower, which she deposited into her mouth. Chewing slowly and without relish, she realized that she had never told Sylvan her name. End of chapter 15.
The Blood Groom by Damien Tavis Tillman. Read by the author. The Blood Groom, Chapter 16. Finding herself too preoccupied to eat, Beverly soon returned to her room and discovered Alyssa sitting cross-legged on the floor, directly in the center of a square of warm light that had angled its way through the window, the sun having just passed the crest of the sky. Her face was turned upward, her eyes closed. Sunbathing? Asked Beverly, taking a seat on her bed. Yeah, I guess, said Alyssa. It's the closest I can get to it in this place. All these fluorescent lights and long hallways are making me crazy. Me too, said Beverly. I'd be so grateful for a lungful or two of fresh air right now. Isn't it strange, said Alyssa, how being here has made us like a bunch of domesticated animals? I mean, all we do is lie around in bed or pace the hallways or try to find little patches of sunlight to sit in while waiting for the next meal or for some activity to amuse ourselves with or to be let outside. It's also dehumanizing. I know, Beverly agreed, but right now, if somebody opened the door and told me that my father was in the lobby waiting to take me home, I don't think I would go. Something has changed here. Haven't you noticed? The air feels different suddenly. Alyssa made a sound of revulsion. It's that guy who came to sit with us at lunch, isn't it? How predictable. Some mysterious man with a dubious accent shows up and suddenly the psych ward of St. Mary's is a grand place to be. Didn't you see him? Beverly exclaimed. Didn't you hear him? How could you not have been intrigued? Everything about him was just so exquisite. You're going nuts, Alyssa said blankly. This place is definitely beginning to get to you. He's probably a psychopath, and he's obviously way older than you. Get a grip on yourself. I wouldn't want to know what he looks like under all of those bandages. I doubt he wants to know what I look like under all of my bandages either, murmured Beverly. Still, he seems so intelligent and debonair. And that name, Sylvan, I can't help it. I'm fascinated. It's all an act, said Alyssa. Just watch. He'll have every girl in the ward in the palm of his hand by the day after tomorrow. He'll have nurses falling over themselves to take his vital signs while he milks his poor, helpless me shtick for everything it's worth. Don't make an ass of yourself. How old are you again? Beverly wondered. 14, said Alyssa. I'm a year older than you, said Beverly. What makes you think you know more about men than I do? Alyssa chuckled. For one thing, she said, I don't go to a Catholic boarding school. Oh, said Beverly, so I suppose you've got a boyfriend and everything, haven't you?
As a matter of fact, I do, said Alyssa. Well, I did until a few weeks ago. I guess we're not together anymore. What happened? Asked Beverly. He went to college out of state, said Alyssa. He didn't want me holding him down. An older guy, said Beverly. A little hypocritical, aren't we? It's not even the same, Alyssa insisted. What, do you expect me to go out with another 14-year-old? You know what boys our age are like. My boyfriend was a few years older than me, sure, but still a teenager at least. This Sylvan guy is probably twice your age. That remains to be established, said Beverly. Just because he has a mature way of talking doesn't mean that he's much older than me. A mature way of talking? Alyssa mocked. It sounded like he was trying to do a bad imitation of Christopher Lee to me. Well, I found it quite charming, said Beverly. It's impossible to find anybody with good diction anymore. Most guys seem to think they can get along just fine with the vocabulary and the manners of a basset hound. There's no shame in being civilized. Yes, but there's shame in being fake, said Alyssa. Maybe Sylvan isn't as fake as you think, Beverly responded. Maybe he's just different. Whatever, Alyssa said, tiring of the topic of Sylvan and boys in general. She retired her place in the strip of sun which moved away to rest against the wall and got back onto her bed where she lay down on her stomach with a pillow under her chin. Christ, I am so bored, she moaned. Do you want to see what they've got on the TV? No, I'm all right here, said Beverly. I had a letter I wanted to write anyway. A letter, said Alyssa? Like, with a stamp and everything? Yes, said Beverly. Why not? No reason, Alyssa said. It's just not something anyone really does anymore. Well, I do it a lot, said Beverly. In fact, it's the way my boyfriend and I prefer to communicate. What's this? Alyssa laughed. Now you've got a boyfriend all of a sudden. Yes, said Beverly. I mean, kind of. I can't really explain it. No need to explain, said Alyssa. He's in jail, isn't he? Absolutely not, cried Beverly. Oh, I see, said Alyssa, squinting shrewdly. Your boyfriend is Jesus. You're one of those fundamentalists saving yourself for marriage prayer diary types. I should have known. No, said Beverly, growing quite hot. He's not Jesus, and he's not made up. His name is Adrian. I have a whole stack of real letters from him back at my school, which I'd happily show you as proof if I weren't trapped in here at the moment. Is that all you Christians do, Alyssa asked? Write letters to each other? What's all this Christian crap all of a sudden, Beverly flared. All I ever said was that I was Catholic. There's nothing strange about it. At least I never went and joined a stupid suicide cult. And what is that supposed to mean, asked Alyssa. I'm talking about you and all the other girls in here, said Beverly. It's obvious that you are all supposed to kill yourselves, but when whatever the first girl did to herself didn't work, you all lost your nerves and just followed her here one by one, like faithful little sheep. I doubt any of you made anything close to an honest effort at dying. We weren't supposed to, said Alyssa. That was never the point. We did what we were told to do. This is where Jennifer said we had to be. And where is Jennifer now? Asked Beverly. Where's your beloved leader? Face it, you have no idea what to do without her. You can go from cover to cover a dozen times a day, and you still won't know what to do. Only she could interpret it. Now what? You've been abandoned, Alyssa. You've been lied to. Tell me, what did she promise you if you came here? Nothing, Alyssa hissed. I came here to be with my friends. Beverly sneered. That's rubbish, she said. Your so-called friends and you don't even talk to each other. That crazy megalomaniac must have assured you of some reward for throwing your whole life away on a trip to the psych ward. But what the hell could have been worth that much? You have no idea what you're talking about and no idea what you're getting into, said Alyssa, jumping off her bed and pushing her finger towards Beverly. You weren't supposed to know about the blood groom. Nobody was. This is all a complete mistake. As far as I'm concerned, Jennifer is gone now because of you. You're the one who's ruined all of our plans. You're the one who's going to pay when the rest of us girls know the truth. Oh, said Beverly, her voice weak with shock. What do you think you're going to do to me here? There are nurses and security guards everywhere. As I said, Alyssa smiled, you have no idea who you're messing with. If I were you, I'd start doing some of that praying you Catholics are so good at. Not that it'll help. She turned and walked out, the door groaning closed behind her. Beverly sat clutching herself on the bed, too shocked and baffled to make any sense of her own thoughts. She immediately considered writing to Adrian, petitioning for some kind of aid, but she realized instantly that a letter might take days to get to him, and that he wouldn't know what to do anyway. Adrian never felt further from her than he did at that moment, never more like a figment of the same odious delirium that had overtaken her reality. and had conjured the blood groom and the long-sleeved girls and that savage, murky hysteria that had brought her to the psych ward in the first place. How had the universe ever become so distorted, so malevolent? What was she to do? She had to call her father, obviously. He would believe her. He would find some way of getting her out, if she could just convince him of the danger she was in. Angry as he might be at her, he wouldn't let his only daughter down in a moment of desperation. His father's heart would betray him. She was certain of it. She leaped off the bed, burst out the door, and ran to the nurse's desk. "I have to make a phone call," she panted. "It's extremely urgent." "Of course," said the nurse, pointing a languid figure at the opposite wall. "The phones are right there behind you." "I don't have any quarters," said Beverly. "I need to use a regular phone, please, right now." "Young lady," said the nurse, "the use of the telephone is a privilege which all of the hospital's guests must pay for. Obviously, I can't just allow you to use one of the phones in the nurse's station. That would be unfair to the rest of the patients." "Yes," said Beverly, "but it's extremely urgent." "Well," said the nurse, "why don't you tell me what your problem is, and I'll decide what the best thing to be done about it is." "There's no way to explain it," said Beverly. "I need to call my father. It's a matter of life and death." The nurse rolled her eyes toward the sky. "For heaven's sake, young lady," she sighed. "I'm not exaggerating," Beverly cried. "My life has just been threatened. I'm in actual danger." "Threatened?" asked the nurse. "Threatened by whom?" "By my roommate," said Beverly. "By Alyssa." "And how did Alyssa threaten you?" asked the nurse. "She said that she and the rest of the girls were going to get me," Beverly answered, feeling rather embarrassed now. "The rest of the girls?" asked the nurse. "What do you mean? Which girls?" "All of the girls that Alyssa came with," said Beverly. "You know, Jennifer's girls." "Listen," said the nurse, picking up her phone. "Just go over there by the window, sit down and calm yourself. I'm calling a doctor. We'll get this all sorted out." "Please," whimpered Beverly. "Can't I just call my father to come and get me out of here?" "Young lady," said the nurse raggedly, "I'm asking you to please sit down, or go back to your room. Whatever you do, just stay away from Alyssa for the moment, and wait for somebody to come who can address the situation properly." Beverly was horrified to realize that she had begun to cry and could not seem to stop herself. As the first sob erupted from her throat, she clapped her hands over her mouth and hurried back to her room, precisely as Sylvan wheeled slowly up the same hallway, holding a book he had gotten from the shabby stack of shelves in the activities room. Beverly saw him, and it only made her more ashamed that she could not recollect herself. She fought the doorknob with her slippery, tear-covered hands for a few moments, then fell into her room, where she stumbled, quivering and gasping, to the nearest bed. There came, on the door, the faintest of knocks. Beverly had hardly heard it through her weeping, so a few more followed, louder than the first. This time Beverly consciously ignored them. There was no one in the world whom she could permit to see her crying. If she were not able to quell it soon, she reasoned amid her tears, she would have to find something to cut herself with. The sharp spoon's handle she had been hoarding would certainly do. Very quietly the door was opened. It lingered for an instant, something scraping against it in passing, then clicked shut, after which came the gentle squeak of a turning wheel. Beverly looked up wildly, dragging her sleeve across her face. "Oh my God, Sylvan," she gasped. "I have no doubt that I'm intruding," Sylvan said softly. No, Beverly ejected wildly, her thoughts in whirling disarray. "Please stay. Just don't look at me crying. Give me a moment to pull myself together." "Nonsense. Not at all," said Sylvan, wheeling forward. "You must cry. You know you must." "No, I mustn't," Beverly sobbed. I mustn't. "Beverly," said Sylvan, "your tears are who you are. They are gold. They are silver. They are precious ore. What good are they, still buried, still trapped in the lightless fathoms? Bring them forward, Beverly. Let them shine." "What?" Beverly moaned. Sylvan's face haloed by a shower of teardrops that splashed across her vision. "Go on," said Sylvan, laying his hand on top of hers. "You're doing so well. Cry. Cry. Release yourself." Now, as if shattered by Sylvan's words, everything within Beverly that might have dammed or diverted the crushing tide of her sorrow was torn to splinters and swept away. She cried as she had never cried before. As she cried, she saw her mother's madness squirming in her brain, she saw her father's hatreds fuming in her breast, and she saw the tears of the Mother of God splashing filthy crimson against her marble-white feet, and she heard the roar of Jesus Christ writhed against the cross, and she saw the heavens ripped to pieces by slithering cracks of ugly light, and she saw herself dead, with her eyes gaping and lidless, with her mouth gushing maggots and bile, with her hands clutching uselessly at the bloody, oozing earth. She saw all of this, and she shook as if her body would crumble to shards, with the cold of every winter she had ever lived, wrapping itself around her, grasping her by the entrails, turning her moans into icicles pushed out from her stomach until bursting through the flesh, filling the air with a blizzard of skin and guts and bone. And then, in a breath, in a flicker, the tears stopped. Her breast was still. Her body lay warm and limp upon the soft and ample sheets of her hospital bed. Sylvan sat at her side, his beautiful face radiating beneficence, his hand held in hers. "That was wonderful, my dear," he said. "Absolutely wonderful." "Wonderful," Beverly whispered. "No, that was horrifying." "To see within yourself," Sylvan said. "It's always horrifying." "To be alive is horrifying," muttered Sylvan smiled. "Yes," he said. "It is." Beverly realized that the grip she had on Sylvan's mangled hand was probably agonizing for him. She released it, but he didn't pull it away. Emboldened to look into his mournful blue eyes, she saw in them libraries and museums and cathedrals, history of everything extraordinary and sublime. "I want to know who you are," she said. He answered, "You do know who I am." The door was thrown open, and Dr. Wolf marched in with Dr. Martin at her side and 2 nurses behind them. "Beverly!" cried Dr. Martin. "Mr. Shepherd," demanded Dr. Wolf, "what is this?" "It is what it appears to be, Doctor," Sullivan responded. 2 persons sitting together in a hospital room. "You 2 are not allowed to be alone together," said Dr. Wolf. "You'll have to leave, Mr. Shepherd. We'll be speaking to you later about this incident." "As you wish, Doctor," sighed Sylvan. "Au revoir, Beverly." He turned himself around, and one of the nurses took the handles of his chair and began staring him out the door. "Are you all right, Beverly?" said Martin. Yes, of course," said Beverly quietly. "I had somehow become extremely upset. Sylvan was just trying to comfort me." "We were told your new roommate said something threatening to you," said Dr. Wolf. "We want to know exactly what happened." Beverly felt still as if she was crawling out of a mist. She struggled to find her memory. It was just that," she stammered. The doctors stared at her with her expressions of agitation and expectancy. "Well, Alyssa and I were having a little argument, I guess, about something or other," Beverly said, and suddenly she said that I was the reason Jennifer had been sent away, and then the rest of the girls found out they would make me pay for it. "Wait," said Dr. Martin. "Alyssa and Jennifer know each other?" "They all know each other," said Beverly. "All the girls on this ward, all the Cutters, except for me. They all know each other. They're like a little cult or something. Aren't you aware of this?" The 2 doctors eyed each other skeptically. "Well, no," said Dr. Martin. "It had frankly never occurred to us. They certainly don't seem to have anything to do with each other." "I know," said Beverly. "That's the way they planned it, so nobody would suspect." "Ah," said Dr. Martin. "Oh, for Christ's sake," Beverly groaned. "Why on earth would I be making this up?" "Nobody's accusing you of anything," Dr. Wolf interposed. "It's just that—" She looked to Dr. Martin, who said, "Well, it's just that this is the second roommate you've had trouble with at Beverly in 2 days." "That's not my fault," Beverly cried. "It's not like I'm asking people to attack me." No, we're not saying that," said Dr. Wolf. "All we're saying is that this is a crowded ward, and one way or another, people just have to learn how to get along and try not to push each other's buttons. Now, maybe Jennifer and Alyssa were just bad fits for you. It's possible, but there's no way we're going to be able to put you in your own room." "Beverly—" "What?" Beverly sputtered. "I'm not asking for my own room. I can't believe you think I'm trying to manipulate you." All right, said Dr. Martin, raising his hands as a token of peace. "Nobody's jumping to any conclusions. Just sit tight for a little while we go and try to find things out from Alyssa's perspective." "Great," said Beverly. "And what if she lies to you?" "We're professionals," said Dr. Martin. "We'll work it out one way or the other." Beverly sank into her bed with a sound of despair. "Is somebody going to call my father?" she asked. "Of course," said Dr. Wolf. "We have nurses trying to reach him now. If we can't get him directly, we'll leave a message for him to call you here, okay?" "Fine," said Beverly. Before the 2 doctors left, the remaining nurse came forward carrying some water and a cup with 2 little blue pills in it. "Just take these and relax," she said cooingly. With the doctors observing her, Beverly had no way of refusing the pills, nor of merely pretending to take them. She swallowed them and lay back on the bed, scowling. The door closed, and she was left alone, her head feeling light and her limbs feeling heavy. She was thinking of Sylvan as she descended into a shallow, unnatural sleep. End of chapter 16. The Blood Groom by Damien Tavis Thurman. Read by the author. The Blood Groom, chapter 17. It was 3 o'clock when Beverly awoke, her consciousness rising abruptly from some dreamless chasm, her heart jumping hotly beneath her shirt. In a few moments, all the sounds of the hospital had returned to her ears, the far-cast voices, the humming and the beeping and the airless silence that covered it all. She wanted, when she turned her head, to see Sylvan by her bedside, where he had sat before, but of course he wasn't there. That he had ever been there at all suddenly seemed doubtable, that he had ever held her hand, helped her to cry without shame, spoken to her in such flawless and fearful phrases. Sitting up, Beverly thought about the last words they exchanged before the doctors crashed in. "You do know who I am." Such a contrived thing to say. Yet he said it in utter sincerity, without irony, without sentiment. He said it, she recalled, with perfect, unimpeachable assurance, as if they were dear acquaintances already, meeting each other for the 100th time, as familiar to each other as the first sentence of a favorite book. But what could have made him answer thus? The thought that he would come to be with her in her distress was enough to hoist her upon pillars of ecstasy, as was the thought that he had troubled himself to learn her name, which she had forgotten to tell him in the dining room. She desired to know him, and she dreamt of him, desiring the same of her, but the fact was that they didn't know each other. She knew absolutely that they had never met before, that she had never known anyone named Sylvan Shepherd. If ever she had seen anyone as magnificent as he, Beverly reasoned, she would have remembered it forever. If anything seemed familiar about him, it was his words, the formality, the delicacy, the care and gravity with which every utterance was made. Though she had never encountered any person who conversed the way he did before, still it seemed to her that the chambers of her heart had already been furnished for such a denizen as this, and were only waiting for him to move in. No preparation was necessary, nothing remained but expectation. In only a few hours, after only a few words, love had come to Beverly, and it had come in a hospital psych ward. She had held his black and wounded hand. She had soaked it in her acrid tears. Neither had been repelled by the other. Beverly shook her head. She lifted her hands to her face and bored down deeply into it with her fingertips, whispering, "No, no, no." It was too much to believe and too much to hope for. She was too young. He was too unearthly. It was in all respects too strange. She got down from the bed and went to the bathroom mirror, where she found nothing but a sour-faced child, a plain and slightly pudgy blot of misdirected girlhood. Horrible, hateful, all wrong. "No, no, no," she whispered again. "Never forget that nobody needs you." A knock upon her door sent Beverly's heart crashing towards her mouth, but it was followed by a nurse's voice. "Miss Kierning," it said, "you have a telephone call by the reception counter." "Thank you, I'm coming," Beverly answered, turning from her reflections with a grimace of disdain. "Daddy?" said Beverly into the phone's black receiver. Beverly, darling," said her father, his voice echoing over a background of jubilant voices and music. "Are you all right?" I'm all right, Daddy," she replied. "Darling," her father said, "I'm so sorry for the way everything has gone. I should have taken your problems more seriously. I should have paid better attention. Will you forgive me?" Beverly laughed perplexedly. "Will I forgive you?" "Listen, Beverly," said her father, "don't blame yourself for anything, okay? I'm going to take care of things." "What do you mean?" asked Beverly. "First of all, I'm going to get you out of there," said her father. "Very, very soon, as soon as I possibly can." "When?" asked Beverly. "Tomorrow," said her father. "I'm hoping for tomorrow." "Oh," said Beverly. "Is that not soon enough?" asked her father. "I know you don't feel safe there. I've spoken to the doctor, and I know the whole situation." No, said Beverly dolefully. "That's quite soon enough. Tomorrow is really very soon." Beverly had been standing, but at this news the strength seemed to escape from her, and she slumped into the nearest chair, laying her head against the wall. "It's just that I have to come and do it myself," said her father. "They won't release you to any of my assistants. I'm stuck in the city tonight. There's just no way out of it. But tomorrow, I think I can make it up there." "Fine, Daddy," said Beverly. "Whatever you can manage is fine. I know you're busy." "I'm busier than I need to be," the man said hoarsely. I should have made you my main point of business from the beginning. I pushed you so far to the side for so long, Bev, and now look at everything that's happened. I blame myself. I blame myself completely. After everything that happened with your mother, I should have known. I should have anticipated. Did I turn out crazy? Beverly suggested. Don't say that, said her father. There's no such thing as crazy. It's just that some people don't get what they need. Some people don't know what they need. Things aren't like they used to be, darling. We know more than we did then when things went awry with your mother. I know more now. I'm going to make sure you have what you need, Bev. Daddy, I'm nothing special, said Beverly. Of course you are, darling, her father exclaimed. You're extremely special. You're smart, beautiful young woman. You deserve to have the world at your feet. Oh, stop it, Beverly mumbled, trying to push her words through a clod in her throat. Please stop it. It's just completely wrong. Her father's tone became distracted. Beverly, darling, my client's just arrived. I can't stay on the line. Listen, did Ronaldo bring you enough clothes? Yes, he brought me plenty, said Beverly. In fact, she had only 2 outfits, but she was so accustomed to dressing in a uniform that variety no longer mattered to her. Good, said her father. Oh, there's one more thing. I got you your own room. Your doctor will explain it to you, okay? I love you, darling. I love you too, Daddy, Beverly whispered. She heard her father begin to greet someone in a high, gregarious voice before letting go of the line. She stayed where she was, though, listening to the dial tone until the recorded operator appeared, saying, if you'd like to make a call, etc. Then she forced herself to stand and return to the receiver to its hook. Looking across the hall, Beverly could see Sylvan's name written by a door on the opposite side of the reception desk. Every molecule in her body seemed to gravitate that way, but 2 nurses were sitting at the station, and both of them were watching her. Her feet faltered beneath her. She drifted sideways as if heading back to her own room, but then she steadied herself, summoning her whole will, stepped forward, and began crossing the corridor. The nurses observed her all the while, but said nothing until she had arrived at Sylvan's door and had raised her hand to knock. Miss Kiernan, said the older nurse, what are you doing? Beverly turned, her fingers still wrapped into a fist. I'm just going to visit a friend, she said. I'm sorry, but Mr. Shepherd is resting now, said the nurse. He won't mind if I stop in, said Beverly. I shouldn't have to repeat myself, Miss Kiernan, said the nurse. I'm telling you that it isn't possible for you to see Mr. Shepherd right now. But why not? Asked Beverly. I see patients visiting each other's rooms all the time. We'll leave the door open. Miss Kiernan, blurted the nurse, this matter is not open to discussion. Mr. Shepherd is unavailable. Please go somewhere else. When he's finished resting, said Beverly, will you let him know that I need to speak with him? Of course, said the nurse. Beverly bit her lip and strode back to her room, where she plucked up her pillow and began hurling it viciously against the post of her bed. When she was out of breath and her hair hung in dark, crosswise strands across her face, she threw the pillow on the floor and dug under the mattress for the plastic spoon fragment. She brought it into the bathroom with her and closed the door. Some time later, Dr. Martin let himself into Beverly's room, finding the girl sitting in immaculate composure on the bed nearest the window, wearing a luxurious scarlet sweater, her hair freshly washed, reading The Blood Groom. Good afternoon, Doctor, she said agreeably. Good afternoon to you, Beverly, said the doctor. May I sit? Please, said Beverly. Dr. Martin took his usual place on the edge of the opposite bed, bouncing kiddishly for a moment, then clasping his hands in front of him and asking, How are you feeling? Very well, thank you, Beverly responded hollowly. Reading anything good? Asked the doctor. Poetry, said Beverly. It's a little arcane, but not at all bad. Am I reading that title right? Asked the doctor, leaning in a bit and squinting. The Blood Groom? Yes, that's right, said Beverly. I believe it's a reference to the crucifixion. I see, Dr. Martin mused. It's a strange-looking little book, isn't it? Doesn't look like one of yours. Did your father's assistant bring it in for you? Oh, no, said Beverly. I got it here. Ha! Exclaimed the doctor. I'm sure I've never seen it before. Even so, said Beverly, I discovered it right here in the ward. The doctor put out his hand. May I take a look? He asked. With a shrug, Beverly gave him the book, which was bent and creased pitifully. Dr. Martin flipped through it, page by page, holding it carefully, like a scientific specimen. His heavy brown and grey brows sloped into a valley of wrinkles. I'm not sure this is appropriate reading material for a place like this, he said. What is it, about vampires or something? Vampires, said Beverly. I hadn't thought of that. The doctor frowned, still flipping the pages back and forth. Well, it's awfully morbid, whatever it's supposed to be about. Look what else I found on your shelf, said Beverly. Plato's Symposium and Phaedo in one volume. What's your point? A symposium is effectively a defense of pederasty, Beverly said. Is that appropriate for a place like that? Okay, said Dr. Martin, but at least it doesn't have anything about self-mutilation or suicide in it. But Phaedo ends with the suicide of Socrates, said Beverly. Yes, said the doctor, but seriously. And you have several copies of the Bible, too, said Beverly. Think of all the people who killed themselves in the Bible. King Saul, Judas Iscariot, numerous others. Beverly, said the doctor, the Groom book looks extremely suspicious. That's all I'm saying. Look, it doesn't even have a publisher's imprint on it. It's obviously handmade. I highly doubt it ended up here with the hospital's knowledge. More likely, some demented jerk left it on the shelf just to make trouble. My dear doctor, said Beverly, you simply have no regard for the literary cutting edge. Ha ha ha, muttered Dr. Martin. Aren't we clever? Anyway, said Beverly, beckoning for the book back, if it doesn't belong to the hospital, I suppose I'll feel free to take it home with me tomorrow. The doctor relinquished the volume to Beverly, who received it affectionately. I guess you've spoken to your father, then, he said. He called about 2 hours ago, said Beverly. Did he tell you about the new rooming arrangement? Asked the doctor. Sort of, said Beverly. He said you'd give me the details. All right, said the doctor. So not only has your very persuasive and influential father managed to get you released long before your treatment is finished, but he is also succeeding in having you transferred, just for the night, it seems, to Ward 3B, to your very own room. Ward 3B, said Beverly. Isn't that where you brought Jennifer? As a matter of fact, yes, said Dr. Martin, but it's very safe there. The two of you will be kept quite separate. Normally, it's only for the patients who have responded well to their treatment and are almost ready to be released. People like Jennifer, who simply can't abide with roommates, provide the very, very, very rare exception, and they are very closely watched. It was too hard for Beverly to dissemble her distress at being moved to a different ward from Sylvan's. When will I have to make the switch? She inquired pensively. Not till after dinner, said Dr. Martin. Beverly nodded. Good, she said. Standing up, the doctor said, Don't let that weird little book give you any silly ideas, okay? Not to worry, said Beverly. Vampires don't frighten me. End of chapter 17. The Groom by Damien Tavis Toman. Read by the author. The Groom, chapter 18. An hour before dinner, at 5 o'clock, intelligence spread through the ward that the external doors of the recreation room would be opened for a period, and the patients of the ward would be allowed to breathe in the relative freedom of the chain-link enclosure partitioning a portion of the roof. A line formed in front of the nurses' station, just like the medication lines formed every morning and evening, except that the patients were handed back the packs of cigarettes they had been forced to surrender at intake. Fearful of encountering Alyssa or any of her sulking cohorts, Beverly had almost resolved upon staying indoors, though like everyone else, her body, mind, and soul all seemed to be withering for a taste of real air and a complete view of the glowering late afternoon sky. Her mind was not made up, though. When the others had already passed down the hallway into the recreation room, she stood on the threshold of her door, wondering if Sylvan would emerge. After 5 minutes, he did emerge, inching out with painful rotations of his wheelchair, which he propelled using his own mutilated hands. Rounding the reception desk, he and Beverly glimpsed each other, and Beverly ran to take the handle of his creaking contraption. I was praying you'd come out, said Beverly. I wouldn't have, said Sylvan, but I had prefigured upon seeing you. As they passed Beverly's room, Beverly dashed in, took the blanket from one of the beds and dashed out again, wrapping Sylvan's shoulders in it before wheeling forward. Sylvan looked up at her gratefully, and Beverly answered with a smile. There wasn't a particle of her being that didn't yearn to do Sylvan service, to prove her devotion, to make herself his, even if she would never see him again after that evening. The fact that she was to go home the next day, and that even if she weren't, she would be divided from Sylvan by all the impregnable walls and doors that divided the two sections of the ward, was too much to think of, too much to speak about.
Sylvan had to know more of her than an introduction in which she forgot to introduce herself, and a farewell in which she could not extract from herself, and she knew she could not, the detestable word goodbye. Both held their silence then until they had pushed their way out, where the chilled air of mid-November found them before they had assembled their senses. There was a utilitarian kind of genius to what that hospital had contrived as a courtyard for the inmates of Ward 3, simply drawing a tall chain-link fence around a long rectangle of exposed roof, thereby allowing Sylvan, Beverly, and everyone else a space the approximate size of a basketball court to mull in. The smokers were all banished to the furthest corner, next to the brick wall that forms the other half of their containment, to stand with their arms crossed, burning as much of their lives away as they were given time to, and obediently tapping their ashes into a large coffee can that had been deposited there for their benefit. Without asking, Beverly already intuited that she and Sylvan should go to the other side of the fence, where, beyond the rude babble of its chinks, a long view could be seen of the world from which they had been severed. It was much like the view that Beverly had from her room, since her window faced the same direction, which she had deduced to be northwest, but without the obstruction of the window frame. A charcoal grey parking lot sprawled beneath them in all directions, through which cars with winking headlights could be observed taking their courses to the various wings: the maternity wing, the cancer wing, wings for birth or death, or an ellipsis of agony to stand between the two. Where the lot ended, the town continued, with the drive to the hospital opening onto a residential back road which connected to a distant thoroughfare which they could just see beginning to twinkle with signs of motor traffic as the orange sun limped homeward and a hulking veil of storm clouds invaded the sky from the north. Beneath these clouds they could look across the never-ending Catholic graveyard, which from their view could have been a town of its own. Oh, the way its infinite rows of white stone devoured everything to the stunted horizon, beyond which, Beverly happened to know, lay the lots where the poor and the unclaimed had long been taken for lonely interment. Just as Beverly was alighting upon this gloomy recollection, Sylvan spoke solemnly, as if pronouncing a quotation from some venerable old book. He said, "What hubris, or what insolence is it that allows the living to scrabble and scurry so boldly in the presence of the dead?" Eloquent though she knew Sylvan to be, Beverly was quite positive she recognized those words, precisely those words, but was, in her bliss at Sylvan's side, too distracted to remember where from. Rather than revealing her momentary ignorance, she responded, "Do you really suppose that the dead are concerned by us?" "Hardly," chuckled Sylvan. "If anything, that awe-invoking necropolis a mile around a meter proves how concerned we are with the dead." Anxious to talk about anything other than matters of finality, Beverly risked abusing Sylvan's patience with an offer of idle talk such as two persons might reasonably make when first coming to know each other. Gesturing over the town, she asked in a tone of sardonic jocundity, "Can you see your house from here?" "No," said Sylvan indulgently. "My home is a great distance from here. What about you?" "I hardly know how to answer," Beverly confessed. She began pointing in direction after direction, sometimes toward the wall behind them, and saying, "My father has a house over that way, and another house over that way, and a penthouse in the city that way, and my boarding school where I live now is across the town in that direction." "In your father's house there are many mansions," Sylvan said with a grin. He knew his Bible, it seemed. Beverly laughed. Indeed, although none of them add up to much of a vision of God's kingdom, I fear." "Don't you believe that God's kingdom has already come?" Sylvan asked. Beverly shook her head soberly. "I don't know what I believe," she said. "Perhaps God's kingdom has already come and already gone. Perhaps we're the residue, left to the devil for one last millennium." Sylvan made a pleased sound of understanding. "1,000 years of infernal jubilee," she muttered. "I'd subscribe to that theory." "Certainly, yes, in a heartbeat." Just then, Beverly felt a shadow of silence fall over the courtyard. She looked around and saw that she and Sylvan were almost alone, except for a few lingering patients dragging out the last of their cigarettes and their comparative freedom, and a lone male nurse obviously battering something into his cell phone. "That's odd," said Beverly. "Did you ever notice any of the other girls come out?" No, but I didn't think they would, said Sylvan. It'd be too hard for them to look like they're not associated, too hard for them to keep their hands off of you, I'm afraid. Wait, said Beverly. How much do you know about all this? Oh, not much, said Sylvan. I have a keen instinct for observation, that's all. Beverly put her back to the fence and stared Sylvan hard in the eye. No, she said. That's an evasion. I can tell you're holding something back. Beverly, my dear, said Sylvan, his voice emptied of all humor. You must believe that I'll always give you everything I can. From beneath the blanket Beverly had cast around him, Sylvan held out his fragile, gauze-bound hand. Beverly took it in both of hers, which were drawn into the ample sleeves of her great deep red sweater. As soon as she touched it, she felt the roar of tears rising from the reservoir of her breast again. She gripped his hand for as long as she could, pressed the tide back, then let it go, painfully, gratefully, when the nurse called everyone inside. I have to speak to you at dinner, Beverly said, as she began to spin Sylvan's chair around towards the door. I expect you do, replied Sylvan. Beverly and Sylvan were the last to re-enter. As the nurse held the door for them, he looked across the blackening, cloud-crammed northern sky and whistled ominously. End of chapter 18. The Blood Groom by Damien Tavis Truman. Read by the author. Chapter 19. Beverly rolled Sylvan back to his room, buffeted by the scornful looks of the nurses at the station, who either disliked the tender deference that had so quickly arisen between the 25-year-old man and the 15-year-old girl, or deplored that Beverly had relieved them of the privilege of pushing the adorable patient from point to point themselves. Or perhaps their disapproving glares had nothing to do with Sylvan, but only with the commonplace little cutter who had driven 2 successive roommates to fits of outrage, and whose father's influence had brought her an undeserved and undesired transfer to the finer side of the ward. At his threshold, Sylvan drew the blanket off his shoulders and returned it to Beverly. They left each other with melancholy smiles and promised to meet again in half an hour in the dining room. Beverly knew that those 30 minutes would not pass easily. She returned to her room and instantly set to pacing in a short, invisible circuit at the feet of the 2 beds, her hands nervously entwined before her. She wondered how difficult it would be in a Catholic hospital to beg a rosary, the praying of which had always proved an effective diversion. But she decided that the nurses would only sneer at her more for affecting religiosity when, between them, they had most likely already concluded upon her being a trollop, a troublemaker, or a hysterical nitwit. Anyway, how could she think to pray now when in her heart she had already betrayed the faint, faraway friend of friends, Adrian, by fixating her affections upon Sylvan, who seemed to be everything Adrian could have been if only he had been made of flesh, not merely of words? Why, wondered Beverly to herself, must I always fall in love with the ineffable, Adrian, who has never shown himself, rarely even spoken of himself, who seems sometimes to be a man, sometimes to be a woman? What sort of lover is this? And Sylvan, a stranger of, 6 hours' acquaintance, an impenetrable invalid, twice my age and weary of his life, now the unsuspecting possessor of my shrunken slip of a heart. For the sin of chasing such wisps and phantasms as these, shall I go to my knees and plead for the intercession of Mary and the martyrs? In her idle perambulations around the room, Beverly went first to her bed, where she plunged her hand beneath the mattress, found her copy of The Blood Groom Alyssa had during her relocation reclaimed her own, and put it into her back pocket. Then she went to her writing desk, where the page still lay as she left it, with only the date and Dare Adrian written at the top. She tried to remember all of remarkable matters which she had longed to make account of for him, but it seemed that her memory had gone as blank as a page, and all she could do was contemplate with nauseous dread the day when Adrian's responses were all that were left to look forward to. What could Adrian say to her now? The Beverly with whom Adrian corresponded was the prisoner of her convent, a self-torturing Rapunzel crying before her white paper window for a pair of arms as secretized as her own to fall into. Their hearts were at liberty and great space between them, but when Beverly lifted her eyes from his letters, the possibility of meeting him repulsed her. The monument he would wither and perish, traversing that gap between the word and the flesh.
She could love him in no coarser form. What could this mean to Adrian, who had never written of love but as a glimmer of two minds across a far-stretching lake of languorous dismay, who had never offered to meet her by the gate or to whistle beneath her window, who had never promised to be anything but a sympathizer? He had never asked the color of her eyes. He would call the question frivolous. What could Adrian say to her now that she had fallen in love? Nothing but, farewell, you fickle, fallen intellect. So she folded her unwritten letter until it was too tiny to fold again, and she flicked it into the wastebasket and it lay there alone. She turned her gaze to the clock, which told her she had 15 minutes more to wait. Still walking in circles, she began reading the Groom again, with the knowledge that each time she looked into it, it revealed less than the time before, its angry secrets retreating deeper into their inviolable mausoleum. Opening it unconsciously, she scanned down in dread. The spirits go meekly, with one hand on the banister, one toe on the step, their whole office honored in one reaping pass. The city is a sleeping place. We slumber where you stir. What hubris or what insolence is it that allows the living to scrabble and scurry so boldly in the presence of the dead? Overpowered by shock, Beverly stumbled back into the chair, her eyes locked on the passage she had by chance rediscovered. These were the words Sylvan had spoken, as they had looked together across the distant burying ground. The very quote she could not then place was here within the book that had been her companion for days, the book she had read dozens of times. How did she not recall it then? And most critically, how could Sylvan have recalled it at all? Her tired mind reeled, trumpeting conspiracy in shrill martial blasts. How could she have been so simple, so sluggish, so asleep? She flipped again through the pages, landing somewhere near the beginning, and read, "Your tears are you are. They are gold, they are silver, they are precious ore. What good are they still buried, still trapped in the lightless fathoms? Bring them forward, let us see them, let them shine." And then, guided by memory's ghostly hand, she turned some pages forward and found the newly roused shuffles and sweeps with her hands, her chamber a swelling conundrum that shrinks when her eyes and her brains mark the walls. Life and death are elastic terms for creatures of our constitution. We have the utmost aversion to the admittance of finality. Beverly had, over a single surreal day, had three separate encounters with this frail and fantastical newcomer to the ward, and each time he had given her a signal that his presence there was neither coincidental nor unintended. Why, the first time they had spoken, he said without prevarication that he had not arrived by any accident. And still, Beverly had never suspected, led afoul no doubt by the indifference shown to Sylvan by the long-sleeved girls, that Sylvan was one of them. He had never intended it to be a secret. He wanted Beverly to see it. And further, by his demeanor in the courtyard, he seemed to anticipate that it would be during the dinner to come that he would discover whether his gracefully interwoven shibboleths would awaken Beverly to the truth. Was he testing or teasing her? Was he to be her initiator? Or had he come to descry the depths of her falsely gotten knowledge and to avenge her intrusion into their mysteries, whatever they were? Had he made himself her confidant only for the chance to what? To murder her? Beverly shook from fury, from fear, from disbelief. She shook as she watched 1 minute follow another, the once slothful clock now whirling her mercilessly forward towards her assignation. She thought for a moment about staying in her room, sheltered in her familiar solitude from this gruesome fantasy into which she had been unwillingly cast. But the thought disintegrated as she closed her eyes and saw Sylvan's gorgeous, mournful face, heard his soft and song-like voice. For good or for evil, for life or for death, she had made herself his, and she would go where she was expected. The hour was announced. She listened to the rattling of the trays as they lurched toward the dining hall. Rising from her chair, she paused before the bathroom mirror, rearranging her hair, which her distress had put into disorder. Glancing back at her bag, which she had packed and left on the bed in preparation for her transfer, she straightened her shoulders, composed her countenance, and departed. "I want to know everything," she said, taking the seat across from Sylvan, who had been deposited at the same table where, a tiny eternity ago, they had met. "So said Faustus to Mephistopheles," said Sylvan, looking pale and afflicted. Beverly took the Groom from her pocket and laid it before Sylvan. He had already shoved his tray aside, unopened it, of course. I want to know everything about this, she said, and then she swept her finger around the room, where the long-sleeved girls sat scattered, dourly chewing their portions, and about them. Ah, said Sylvan, touching the book fondly, my tragic little masterpiece. I'm glad you found you. Have you been enjoying it? It bewilders and terrifies me, said Beverly. Considering the critics have maintained a frigid silence about the blood Groom, said Sylvan, picking the book up and thumbing its pages, I suppose I will accept that as the best review so far. So you are the author, said Beverly. All of this came out of your head, and for what? What does it mean? Tell me, Sylvan. Don't keep yourself from me. Sylvan looked across at Beverly sadly, returned the book to the table, and sighed. It's just a false gospel, dearest. Can't you tell? It's a profane assemblage of mostly meaningless, self-indulgent twaddle. I hardly remember what I put in there. You can't expect me to believe that, said Beverly. You're misleading me on purpose, so I will figure out what you and those girls are up to. Those girls, Sylvan laughed. They don't even know what they're up to. All they were told was to pretend not to know each other, and conspicuous as they are, they've managed rather well at it seems. Are they supposed to pretend not to know you either? Asked Beverly. They don't have to, said Sylvan. None of them have the slightest idea who I am, except Jennifer, naturally. I don't understand, Beverly groaned. None of this makes any sense. Don't be so despairing, Beverly, said Sylvan. If I had 100 years to explain, I couldn't make it make sense to you. All you have to know is that you're safe as long as I'm with you. Nothing can harm you. As long as you're with me, said Beverly, what will happen to me if you're not? Sylvan lowered his voice to a near whisper and said, Pull down your sweater and look at your left breast. Stunned, Beverly didn't move, but stared open-mouthed at her companion. Please, dear, while nobody's watching, Sylvan urged. Don't worry, I'll look away. Confoundedly, Beverly complied, wincing with pain as the neck of her sweater passed over something raw. Traces of blood smeared downward as the fabric scraped off a freshly formed scab. New marks had been cut into her hitherto unscarred breast. A carefully drawn heart with 5 tallies slashed within its bounds, the symbol of the long-sleeved girls and of the blood Groom. How did that get there? Beverly gasped. When? From the looks of it, said Sylvan, glancing up facetiously, I'd say you did it about 2 or 3 hours ago. No, said Beverly. 2 or 3 hours ago is when I did this. She rolled up both of her sleeves and revealed a few rows of poorly shaped gouges, which she had, with much struggle, chiseled into the unbandaged parts of her arms with the end of the broken spoon handle. That symbol came out of nowhere. I couldn't have even managed it with the implement I was using. And yet there it is, Sylvan said. Why did you go yourself that way in the first place? Beverly dropped her gaze and confessed, I'm supposed to be released tomorrow. I cut myself to force my father to keep me here, so I could stay with you. Oh, Beverly, said Sylvan tenderly. My dear girl. I've been alone long enough, Beverly went on. This world has been hell for me, from the beginning of my memory, a ceaseless, solitary torment. For 6 hours of my life I felt as if your heart and mine were beating together. I felt closer to you than I feel to myself. If I have to let that go tomorrow, if I ever have to let it go, I'll die. I know I'll die. I want you to tell me, said Sylvan, about the first time you cut yourself intentionally. But why? Asked Beverly. Please, said Sylvan, indulge me. Beverly, her sleeves now rolled down again, withdrew her hands into them, as was her predilection, and recounted. It was a little less than 5 years ago. I had been arguing with my father a lot, because it had been 2 years since my confirmation, and all I had wanted since then was to spend as much time at church as I could, celebrating Mass, confessing for no reason, saying my rosary, whatever. Everything about religion excited me. It seemed that the shrine, amidst all the crucifixes and candles, was the only place I felt at home. Lately it occurred to me that if I liked church so much, I must have meant that God was calling me to his service, like one of the saints. He wanted me to become a nun. I waited for a while, prayed constantly, and when I was quite sure of it, I told my father that I wanted to be enrolled in a convent, that I wanted to become a novice, to be trained up to take holy orders. My father couldn't accept it. He laughed, and when I persisted, he shouted. He said that these weren't the Middle Ages anymore, and that I could do all the praying and all the charitable work I wanted in the world without putting on some ridiculous habit and proclaiming myself a lifelong virgin. He interpreted it as me saying that I thought I ought to be punished for being alive, for being human, made of flesh and prone to all the fleshly desires. Perhaps that's what I was saying. Perhaps I was calling him a sinner for conceiving me out of wedlock with a schizophrenic woman who he married out of obligation. Perhaps. But in any case, his denial made me furious. I screamed that he was standing in the way of God's intentions, and that his soul would pay the price someday. I effectively damned my father to hell, a mortal sin if ever there was one. Racked with guilt and rage and hatred and frustration, I ran back to the chapel, vowing that if God couldn't have me one way, he'd have me another. When I got there, I knelt before the crucifix, made sure I was alone, and I always was, and in the light of a dozen candles, carved 5 incisions into my wrist with a borrowed penknife, 1 mark for each wound suffered by Christ on the cross. But I hadn't planned ahead. I started gushing blood all over the floor and the bench and the sacred objects, and I had nothing to wipe it up with, so I just ran out, leaving drops of myself all the way down the aisle, then around the nave, where, blind with panic, I plunged my bleeding arm into the font of holy water by the door, an irrevocable defilement. When I realized what I had done, I bolted out the door and down the steps, and never went to the same church again. I heard rumors that the bishop of the diocese had to come down and reconsecrate the whole church because they took all the blood to be an act of sacrilegious vandalism. In fact, that's what it was, so I had meant it to be an act of devotion. From that point forward, every time I tried to pray, I would feel those 5 incisions burning and seething with indescribable pain. The only thing that would relieve it was if I cut myself again, somewhere else, and the more I cut myself, the better it felt. I could never take communion again. I felt too impure, but when I cut, wherever I was, I would feel like God was prayers that coursed up through my skin, and I felt sanctified again. Outcast, excommunicated, but somehow sanctified. And that's why when I first read the Blood Groom, after finding it beneath the mattress of Jennifer's bed, I was so wonderstruck by it and so horrified. It seemed to confirm the secret heresy that I could never fully confess to myself, that I had been accepted by the Lord as the bearer of his wounds, that my blood, my anguish, was as good as any sacrament, my never-ending martyrdom. Yes, said Sylvan fervidly, you cleaved immediately to the parts that were written for you and for you alone, though they're there for all the acolytes to see. Despite what you've been told by those dear, disaffected know-nothings, and he nodded in the direction of some of the long-sleeved girls, the Blood Groom is not a secret book, even though it's filled with secrets. There's a section for the common acolytes, the girls as you call them, and another section only for you, Beverly, and a final section for the unbelieving world, for the great soulless Babylon that crashes and hums around us. Beverly's eyes grew round and frightened. You're speaking of the third part, the apocalypse. Precisely, said Sylvan. In that part, the world may see itself and know its own end. Beverly gave a grim, apprehending nod. She wanted to believe that what she was hearing was the essence of madness, but in her deepest heart, she knew that Sylvan was not mad, and that all he spoke was a sacred truth. Sylvan lay his blistered hand on the table, and Beverly raised her own to take it delicately. Sylvan said, To learn everything is to lose everything, Beverly. Are you sure you're ready? At the touch of his hand, Beverly's eyes filled instantly with tears, an effect she now realized was simply a quality of Sylvan's miraculous nature. I'm ready, she said. The world is lost to me, and I to it. There is nothing in it worth keeping, nothing keeping me in it but you. Sylvan smiled and gently removed his hand so that Beverly could wipe her tears and listen attentively. He said, It has already begun to rain. Tonight, shortly before midnight, the rain will work itself into a deluge, far worse than we had on the night I arrived, and the earth will shake like on the day of the Passion. The hospital and all the city around it will be briefly darkened. There will be no lights, no electricity, no sound, but the rain and the fearful wailing of children. You will be alone in the room to which you are being transferred. You are not to leave, must remain there, in the dark, praying intently, ignoring all you hear outside. Do you understand? Beck, swallowing her horror, said, I understand. Sylvan continued, When all is quiet, and the thunder and tumult has subsided, you will be visited, and everything will be made clear to you. It's best that I tell you nothing more about it. Be prepared for anything. Empty yourself of fear, and let your thoughts constantly attend upon me. When the night is over, I'll return for you, and we'll go away together. Go away? She said in a tone of hope and apprehension. Far away, said Sylvan. The two of us. Dinner had again ended, with neither Sylvan nor Beverly touching a particle of food to their lips. Beverly was too rapt with tremulous expectation to give heed of her hunger pangs. As for Sylvan, she had begun to doubt that he had any use for food at all, since everything about him now seemed quite supernatural. Beverly had hoped to wheel Sylvan back to his room, but before she had risen from the table, a nurse, a young woman with an honest face, had swooped in to claim the handle. She gave an inquiring but unaccusative glance at Beverly and clucked wordly when she saw that neither of them had so much as uncovered their trays. Sylvan plucked the copy of the Blood Groom up off the table and offered it to the nurse. "A little light reading?" he said. "No, thanks, honey," said the nurse. "I've got no time for books." "What a shame," said Sylvan. As the nurse pushed him away towards the door, he blew a kiss to Beverly from his gauze-covered palm. "Adieu, my dear. Until tomorrow," he said. "Till tomorrow," said Beverly, rubbing the spot on her breast where the mark of the Blood Groom had again begun to scab, while across the room one of the long-sleeved girls peered at her with a look of caustic resolve. End of chapter 19.